listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across these divided states of America and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, your burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning again, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were about 13,775 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 287 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 11,466 cases per day. That's a decrease of 10% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 47% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 54% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 33,632,070 people across the United States and has killed about 604,356 people. The World Health Organization has warned there would be another wave across Europe of COVID, of course, unless countries begin to take rigorous precautions. This warning comes as cases are rising again on the continent after more than 2 months of continued decline. Indonesia is imposing coronavirus lockdowns starting this Saturday in order to try to curtail COVID, which is affecting Indonesia more than any other country in Southeast Asia right now. In Thailand's prime minister said the reopening of the holiday island of Phuket to foreigners is a risk, but one his citizens need to accept. Starting today, foreign travelers will be able to travel to the island without quarantining for the first time in 16 months. Prayut Chan-o-cha is using Phuket as a sandbox for other tourist sites in the country due to the fact that as an island, Phuket serves as a tourist experiment, as a useful experiment with reopening for tourism because, you can shut it down effectively. It's insulated. It is insular. In national news, there were charges filed against the Trump Organization and the CFO. Yesterday, the CFO, Alan Weissenberg, has turned himself in. This has to do with a tax investigation into benefits given out to employees and taxes not being paid on them. Anyway, driven by Cyrus R. Vance Jr., the district attorney over there, and one of the bigger news items of the day, I would say. We'll be coming back to this, in future headline segments, of course, as well as with guests throughout the show. Tongue-tied there for a second. Donald Rumsfeld died yesterday at the age of 88. He served twice as Secretary of Defense, once under Gerald Ford and once under George W. Bush. He also, played a major role in starting the Iraq War and is sort of on the list of war criminals known for having played a major role in the Iraq War and, just the whole long drawn-out saga. Two-time Secretary of Defense, once under Gerald Ford and again under Bush. That's a pretty wide span of time. He was in there from I think in 75 as well as 2005, which is a 30-year span to sort of first plant your flag and then come back to it or whatever. Anyway, we'll be talking about Donald Rumsfeld as well with Scott Ritter later on in the show. A couple cases here. Bill Cosby has been released after his sentencing was basically overturned, having to do with a sort of procedural error, it seems, like some serious problems the prosecutors made when they were executing this case, when they were prosecuting this case, having to do with, I will be honest, I do not fully understand it. I've read about it, but I don't understand exactly what they got wrong. But basically, they put him in a situation where he couldn't use the Fifth Amendment, as far as I can tell, and that seems to have invalidated the case. Yeah. They basically tactically deprived him of a certain right, I think, is what's being alleged here, and that means that it's a problem, and he's therefore free for now.
Yeah, let's keep going. We'll
come back to it. Also, another legal case. The judge in the Britney Spears case has denied her request to be removed from a conservatorship. I believe that we spoke about this late last week, where we went over her heartfelt plea, not just to the judge, but also to kind of the world, to get her out of this conservatorship, where, again, she is effectively, due to perceived mental instability, a slave to her family. And I mean slave in the sense that she has to work daily hard to make the money while she has very little volition or choice over what she does. But, she has very little bodily autonomy. She can't choose whether or not she wants to have kids, whether or not she wants to go on a ride in a car with her boyfriend. That was a point that she kept making. We can come back to it. But big case here. In international news, Chinese President Xi Jinping has warned that foreign powers will have their heads bashed if they try to bully China, saying that the Chinese people have created their own world. I don't think they're talking about, like a physical pocket world or something. Anyway, Jinping said these words during the huge centenary celebrations of the forming of the Chinese Communist Party. Jinping also repeated a longstanding Chinese promise to integrate Taiwan or reintegrate Taiwan, however you want to look at it. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And a couple of quick heads up. Brian McDonald, 7:30. We're planning on speaking to him about a couple of things. And then, like I said, Scott Ritter, 8:15 to 8:45. And then I believe we have Guy McPherson from 8:45 to 9.
Yes.
Talking about climate stuff. And then at 9 o'clock, just heard back from Ted Rall. I'm going to be talking with Ted Rall about the charges against the Trump Organization, Alan Weisenberg turning himself in, all that stuff, what's going on over in New York City.
Let's talk about Cosby.
Go for it.
Let's talk Bill Cosby. There are 3 tracks, and I'll try to make it succinct. First, there are some African Americans who are going to be celebrating right now, just like there are some who are celebrating, let's say, R. Kelly, or some who are celebrating Michael Jackson, despite, Michael Jackson's sins. This stuff gets a little weird to me. And some of it goes along this notion of they are prosecuting Cosby either unfairly, they're going after Black icons and building him up and taking them down, meaning the Cosby Show and his life and everything else. But let's be clear, Bill Cosby spent a lot of his time telling Black people to pull up their pants and move, that type of stuff. And it's like to have a history of drugging and raping over the course of apparently decades with scores of women, with Bill Cosby's name in and of itself being a protection for that one and same Bill Cosby, who's just a man, just a person who's doing these horrible things. Bill Cosby, so that's the first point. This is not necessarily something to celebrate in the sense of an individual and that individual getting off because the individual didn't do anything. No, that person seems to have done something. He got off on something else. Now, this goes into the second tract. This is good if indeed this is right, if that makes sense. But good in a very strict sense of, okay, yeah, you don't want people railroaded. And I don't want someone railroaded that is innocent, where that person is like, I didn't do this. And you have this one technicality saving that person's life, which is the reason that technicality is there. Meaning it's not a technicality at all if they flagrantly ignored something that was a protection for that same Cosby. Yeah. Meaning you got to get them within the context of the rule set. The rule set is there for the defense of people like you, me, who didn't necessarily do anything wrong and who a federal government may be trying to go after and get. And the federal government has all sorts of powers and authority and tricks and weight associated with putting their knee on your throat in order to get you for a crime, whether you did it or not. That's secondary. I'm making the point that no, I don't like the fact that Bill Cosby seems to have gotten off on a technicality. Yes, I like the fact that the technicality was at the very least honored by that same Supreme Court as not a technicality at all, if that makes sense. On the third point, this is horrendous. This is horrendous. Bill Cosby, in many respects, might have, despite this being a technicality, got off because of his name. Now, if this was Bob Thomas going before the Supreme Court, does it get to the Supreme Court? Or is it because the name is Bill Cosby? And you think of all of the people that were, just ruined by this. I mean, because I'm saying he had victims that were a list of victims. And let's say that 98% of those victims are lying. You still end up with like 20 people, right? I mean, and yes, I'm being hyperbolic, but you get my point. Yeah, this is horrendous. Even though on some level, in a, I guess, strictest democratic legal sense, good? What are your thoughts? I mean, I know this sounds, it's weird, but it's 2 tracks of thought. It's, no, this is not a great outcome. Yes, Bill Cosby seems to have a huge number of victims and everything else. By the same token, from a strict legal sense, if they indeed blew away something that's supposed to be a right for us as human beings, not just for Bill Cosby, then in a legal sense of the word, the Supreme Court did their jobs. What are your thoughts?
I think you pretty much captured how I feel about it. One thing I would add to it, and believe me, if I disagreed with you seriously, I'd get into it. But
this is a gross thing.
It is a gross thing.
For me to even postulate.
Exactly.
All right, in the strictest legal sense of the term, yes.
Yeah.
But in every other sense of the term as a human being, oh gosh, no.
Yeah.
No. Like, what do you do with that, right?
But there's one thing that I would add to it, which is that from the perspective of, think about the prosecutors again, coming back to them, they're looking for a scalp here.
Yes.
So Cosby gets off because he's a big name, but they're probably also willing to play.
Can they get a second bite at the apple? That's the other point.
I don't know, but that's double jeopardy. It's that kind of thing.
Well, they just blown away this case.
I hear you.
I mean,
That's
because the prosecutor, and look, this is not typically me saying, yes, do that. Because usually I hate the fact where prosecutors are like, I didn't do anything wrong in this. I hate that. And it's like, or this guy gets off. That guy spent like 20 years in prison, and you find out that there was something that they got wrong. Like they didn't, like the witness lied.
Yeah.
Or the witness was already a liar. They knew the guy was a liar, and they pushed the guy in order to get that. I hate that stuff. And they're like, well, we didn't do anything wrong. We think the guy's still guilty. It's like, dude, all your evidence just fell apart.
Yes.
Yeah, but we think we're right.
I hear you. And you're excited to see this happening in the legal system, but you're also like, is this only happening because he's famous?
Yeah.
And should this be happening at all because of all the things he did? But there's this draw to defend him because, maybe there's this perception that a lot of black celebrities get targeted and, like you said, get like puffed up. I remember.
Yeah, see, I think that's so bogus. I think it
happens with celebrities in general.
Yeah.
I think that is what we do with our celebrities by and large. Depending on the kind of celebrity, maybe like probably a bit less with sports stars, but certainly like if you're in music or film or if you're any what people think of as a celebrity. Like Britney Spears.
Yes.
This is a South Park meme joke, dark humor thing back in the day where this is the exact premise of the episode they had about her. Everybody builds this person up. They build her up. They, tell her she's incredible and force her to do incredible things and watch her while she's doing them and kind of drive her crazy. And then when she starts to act a little bit crazy herself, everybody's completely misunderstands her. They criticize her. They abuse her. They go after her. And you can just try to empathize with the person in that situation. Anyway, my point is that's how that works. You build people up, then you tear them down because the whole while you're able to capitalize on that.
Yes, and I think it depends on the person, and I think it depends on the image.
Yeah.
Bill Cosby, because of who Bill Cosby is, has a protection about Bill Cosby, meaning there's a bubble of protection around Bill Cosby. So when you get date raped by Bill Cosby, it's like, wait, did I just get date raped by Bill Cosby? But think about what you're saying for the moment, because Bill Cosby at that point is not just, Bob Thomas. It's everything else that's associated with Bill Cosby.
That's anybody in power. That's how that.
He's in power. I mean, that's a powerful position to be in.
Same thing with Andrew Cuomo. If you get date raped by Andrew Cuomo,
and it's like, wait, do I say something about this?
To?
Who do I say this to? Are they going to believe me if I say it?
Should I go straight to the federal government because he is the governor? Or what do I do?
What do I do? And then it's like, do I want to even take the heat when I come out about it? Like, I am one of the anonymous masses. Do I want to come out and say Bill Cosby raped? It's all of that that's associated with it. And that goes on for years. And it's like when it finally tumbles, it tumbles. Because at that point, it's like, did Bill Cosby really do this? Like the moment that you get it out a little bit, it takes off like wildfire.
Yeah.
And in that case, Bill Cosby, it tumbled. And I don't think it's just, that's why I don't buy they're building this guy up to take this specific person down because Bill Cosby.
Oh, no. Yeah. I don't think it's tactical.
You're talking about celebrity in general.
Yeah,
there's
the dynamic of it. There's that, just that.
I guess I'm saying Bill Cosby on some level was above that in a weird way. Because he wasn't just a celeb, he was a black celeb. He was a black celeb that had the Bill Cosby show.
It was like a wholesome family kind of
wholesome family guy. It's like Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of thing.
Exactly. If he was black Mr. Rogers on top of it, like the guy, he didn't curse in his comedy act. Yeah. It's like it's all of that. Like Richard Pryor or Eddie Murphy were the people who cursed. They were the edgy comedians. Bill Cosby,
and they were still loved. But no, Bill Cosby was the more homey kind of guy.
I mean, it was astonishing, right? And so it's like that was a protection in and of itself.
Totally.
And so the fact that he got prosecuted on some level.
They had to burst that bubble. And at the same time, looking at this now, seeing him get off any quote unquote technicality, even though it isn't like we were talking about.
But it's not a technicality, and yet it is. But it's both.
But here's the thing.
Weird.
You're looking at that and you're like, okay, his fame is part of what made it possible for that to actually happen, for this recent move.
But it's like a legal thing that is there for all of us for that. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's a legal premise.
No, it's a benefit for all of us.
Yeah.
I get it. And he's just that because he's famous, he's able to sort of use that. It's
much more
applied
so,
or
I
something
guess.
to him.
Yeah.
I get it. But at the same time, the prosecutors are probably more willing to go. It's like coming back to Cuomo. He might be a big target that you're a bit afraid to hit. But once you see other people swarming him, you're like, okay, there's a lot of
Fair
meat on
game.
those bones. There's a fair game. Exactly.
Right.
And so for the prosecutors, I could see that. And then with this overturning too, it applies both ways. Anyway, we might want to go into our break. We can come back in your soapbox segment. In Jamarl's monologue with a short back and forth between us. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. This is a very weird transition because eventually we're talking about Bill Cosby, who is basically got off for date rape over the course of several decades, and now we're going to make this hard pivot into something else that is a preoccupation of mine. And like my wife, who's stuck with me and who's stuck with my preoccupations, whether that's, well, she wasn't with me during the point of chess, but she was definitely with me during the point of either news, definitely a point of politics, definitely a point of UFOs. And you guys only see a sliver of that. She had to deal with, is it real? How real is it? Oh my God, aliens eating babies. Okay, that's stupid. It's essentially going through all of the stuff until getting into this kind of position of, all right, believe what you can defend and go from there. Hence, where I am today. Believe what you can defend. Despite the fact of believe what you can defend and using that as somewhat of a premise of operation, and I think that should be a premise of operation accepted by the community in general, especially with this notion of credibility being endowed, since credibility is not something that is endowed, let's say, or it can be transferred, and transferred in a way that is accepted as absolute reality, despite the fact it may be accepted as real. There's a difference in realness. That's the thing I hit my head on. I was befuddled recently, and I've been over the past week. What I mean by that is I've been preoccupied with the report that came out. And not just the report that came out, the responses to the report that came out. The report that came out wasn't just from the Director of National Intelligence talking about UFOs and saying that this stuff is real. It was basically by every alphabet soup agency signing on to say, we back up this report saying that things that are in our airspace that we don't necessarily know what they are, that are better than our own aircraft and the capabilities of our aircraft, we have no idea what they are. We admit that there's technology. We're saying that they're not us. And we are telling the public it's real. 30, 50, 60, 70 years reportings by our brave men and women in uniform who are basically castigated or ridiculed and pushed into silence. And understand, this is silence, this is data, this is information that these guys had and was reporting on things that were in our sensitive installations, but because they looked a little strange or they were doing things that our craft didn't necessarily do, and we couldn't necessarily ascertain intent, they didn't necessarily want to be ridiculed, so they just kept their mouths shut and they remained silent. The information hits the public, and not just hits the public, the information hits the public in a way where the government basically says, all right, you got us. We admit it's a real thing. And they make the point of saying this could represent a national security issue in regards to, look, since we can't compete and we don't understand intent, and because we can't compete, we don't necessarily understand intent, and it is in our sensitive military installations, yeah, by definition, this is a national security, quote unquote, in the way they would use it, threat. I sat there and I read the report, and I was like, oh my God, they've admitted to this. This is shocking. Because the moment that you admit to this, you've admit to all sorts of failure by the Department of Defense. You've admit to things that have taken place over the course of decades, not just within the contours of this particular report. It's like a lot of stuff falls out of the admission in and of itself. And yet, the world didn't change. The world didn't stop. As my wife said, hey, don't I have to go to work the next day? Aren't you going to want dinner tonight? The world didn't stop. And I think for the UFO community, they were angry on some level because they thought, of course we knew this part. Me, I'm like, whoa, this is astonishing that they're confirming this. This is a clear confirmation. And yet the world didn't stop. Why didn't the world stop? And what I mean by why didn't the world stop is that the moment that you've come across something that is so profound, that is so paradigm shifting, and everything that comes out of the fact of that paradigm shift, meaning your world, in the context of your world, has just radically expanded within the course of a split second. And yet, why didn't the world notice? I realized that there was a difference in realness. I was befuddled by it. And befuddled is somewhat of a wondrous thing to be in, especially when you're just kind of walking around for the next 3 days befuddled by the whole thing. And that was it. There's a difference in realness. For example, let's play the clip of Ratcliffe.
Look, the bottom line is with unidentified aerial phenomenon, many, many cases, Dan, we're able to explain it away for reasons like visual disturbances or weather phenomenon or foreign adversaries and their technologies, or even our own experimental technologies with certain aircraft and vehicles. But what this report really underscores, Dan, is that that there are a number of instances, and the specific number remains classified, but a number of instances where we've ruled all of that out. And there are technologies that we don't have, and frankly, that we're not capable of defending against based on those things that we've seen, multiple sensors. In other words, we're not just people visually.
Director of National Intelligence, Ratcliffe, former, who saw the background files. He knows what he's talking about. He's not talking about this from, this is what I feel about this. This is what I've seen that I can't allow you guys to see, but that I can disclose. It's that. Now, I hear that and I think, oh my God, this is what he just admitted to. Let's go to Romney, because people may say, okay, well, Ratcliffe is somewhat of an edge figure despite the fact that he was director of national intelligence. What about Romney? Romney is as mainstream Republican can get. There is no more mainstream than Romney. And you could say Romney or you could say Hillary Clinton. Those things are, on some level, very much the same, right? Hillary Clinton was into the UFO thing herself. And I'm shocked that she hasn't even come out and said, I saw the files. Well, of course, because she hasn't necessarily seen the files. But if she was president, when Donald Trump was president, and this stuff started hitting the press, and she had been talking about it, what do you think she would have done? And do you think that would have created an impetus for her to say, okay, well, I wasn't going to do this, but since these reports are out, of course she wanted to do it. Everybody in her administration wanted to do it. Her Podesta came out and said his greatest failure was not getting the UFO documents released. Those were the people who were backing her when she was running. So yeah, she was going to do it. Trump came in. It decapitated the process. I'm making a point of saying, what would it have looked like if she did that? And I'm taking everything else that's associated with Hillary Clinton and just putting it on that very specific thing. But Romney, mainstream also. Let's hear Romney.
Intelligence just a few days ago released a new report on 144 sightings of what they call unidentified aerial phenomena. Virtually all of them remain unexplained. Whatever these are, they appear to not only be technology that the United States does not have, but technology that we cannot even explain. I know a lot of people joke about this, but you're a national security hawk. How concerned are you about these objects, and where do you think they come from?
Well, I don't believe they're coming from foreign adversaries. If they were, why, that would suggest that they have a technology which is in a whole different sphere than anything we understand. And frankly, China and Russia just aren't there. And either are we, by the way. So I'm not worried about it from a national security standpoint. If for some reason these came from another system, if you will, another alien society, which I frankly would find hard to believe, but I guess all things are possible, that would be fascinating. Interesting. I know there are, they say, trillions of galaxies out there, so who knows what might have developed somewhere else. But that would make me more fascinated, not fearful. And I guess I also think that we have a lot more significant challenges ahead of us
Stop right there for a moment.
And now.
Let's stop right there for a moment. Because I think that's it. I think Romney encapsulates humanity in this moment. Romney is trying to reconcile two magnificent things. And he hasn't internalized one of those things, despite the fact that he's taking off the table the other two options, the only other two options. Romney would say, yes, this is real. That's what this report underscores. I've seen the stuff, and yeah, I don't believe it's China and Russia. All right, so you've taken off China, Russia, and secret tech off the table. All right, great. I don't think it's aliens, but, I guess it's possible. Okay, Romney. It's not Russia, it's not China, and you don't want to think it's aliens. All right, Romney, which one is it, Doug? Which one is it? You can't have everything, meaning you can't have it both ways. You have to reconcile one of those things. Meaning, because from a logical standpoint of things, it has to be something because you've established it as something.
Mylar balloons, baby.
Yeah, right. I mean, because he's saying it's not China and Russia, even though the tech blows our tech away. You can't have it both ways. And I think that's what it is, though. I think it's people are saying, all right, we've been told that this is real. The government has extended credibility to it. But credibility is not the same thing as realness. Meaning when I go out and I use my dollar, yeah, the dollar has value. The dollar feels real to me because I'm using it every day. But you've just established that, okay, this item is real, but it's intellectually real. It's not the same thing as you looking at a video and seeing something going at Mach 10 and making a right turn immediately with a pilot saying, oh my God, like in the background and in the headphones, like, didn't say that. And then radar picks it up and everything else. It's not that. You weren't given that. You were just given this extension of credibility. And that's different than realness. Realness is something else. Does that make sense? There's a difference in those things. Me telling you something is real, even from the standpoint of the government saying, okay, we're establishing this, is true. It's not the same thing as you seeing it, experiencing it, and encountering it on a daily basis. Nor is it as if our reality has shifted in such a way we accept this as being entirely real. It's just real. And people haven't been able to entirely reconcile the gravity of what that is. So it's like, okay, yeah, we get that this is a real phenomenon now. Okay, fair enough. And then they move on. But it's like they don't internalize what that means yet because they haven't necessarily been given anything for them to be able to internalize what it means. They haven't been given something that asserts itself so thoroughly where it's going forward. Not only is this a UFO, not only if we know this is not Russia and China, but we accept on a God's honest level in the way that lungs understand air that this is a reality. People aren't there. And the government asserting and such doesn't make it so. And Romney, representing all man in this case here, okay, we don't believe it's Russia and China. All right, fair enough. It's like, well, Romney, you gotta engage that. You gotta engage both sides of that, Romney. It's real, yes. It's not Russia and China, yes. It's better than our technology, yes. Well, it's possible it was aliens. It's that. But it's that part isn't internalized, despite the fact that people would take the other ones off the table as being, oh, that's ludicrous. It's very weird. It's a very, so for me, I end up in befuddlement. Do these people not get what they are saying? Do they not reconcile?
No, but it's a big pill you're asking them to buy. Can I
yeah. Go for it. I mean, it's weird to me. That's all.
It is a big pill. It's a lot that you're asking somebody to swallow.
Exactly. And it's so big.
Yeah. And it's not even like a pill with a definite shape. It's like a pill with an unknown shape of unknown dimensions. I'm kidding. It's not a physical pill that you're asking them to swallow. So it's like, wait, what do you want me to believe in? What is the actual implication here? Yeah. What does this entail? The aliens, even aliens. There's a vast gulf between technologically advanced, warlike aliens, and technologically advanced pacifistic aliens who are going to, treat us very kindly.
All of the technology, all of the weird physics, all of that stuff expands your world like instantaneously. And people are like, Yeah, dog. I need to see that video of that thing turning.
Yes,
Make it right.
because there is until they get the factual evidence, there is no there. And even if they get the factual evidence, it's like Missouri's a show me state. You know, people are show me people.
Yeah.
We want to be physically brought into the situation that you're describing to
Not
us.
just intellectual.
Not just intellectually, because it doesn't actually, you know, unless you have a particularly imaginative mind, and even then you're going to get it wrong. You're not actually brought into it.
Yeah.
You get my point. And so, and so Romney, I think in my opinion, it's a perfectly reasonable response. What is his alternative? Is it his alternative to immediately throw his lot in with, okay, everybody, aliens are real, folks.
Right.
I don't know what they are. I don't know what they're like, but this is the only thing that makes sense. And I want to come out as the only politician in the state of Utah to advocate for the existence of aliens or whatever. He wouldn't do that. I don't see him doing that. And people in general are just going to hedge their bets or whatever and sort of wait and see what this turns into. And for a lot of people, A, we're busy. This story just came out.
Yep.
B, people are pretty adaptive anyway. And I get the feeling that for like the majority of the world's population, if you suddenly told them and they saw, okay, aliens exist, this is what they look like, this is their name, this is Bob the alien, this is Sally the alien, whatever. Within a couple of weeks, they just get used to it. I feel like legitimately, we are so adaptive as a species that we could just find a way to accept it and carry on, keep our life going. And it's like we wouldn't react as radically as you are because you're so interested in it.
But is it true? Is that true? I mean, especially if it's not, this is Bob the alien. It's just, we have no idea what it is.
This is Siglar the alien.
Or we just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's that part. It's that part. Because I don't know if people would, I think people would adapt, yes. I think it would be, but I don't think it would be as easy as I think you think it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big fear. I mean, like, unless you think these guys were wrong in regards to their fear. I mean, I think you might adapt pretty quickly. I think you might be like, all right, fair enough, new reality, right? Let's keep it moving. I think people, I'll tell you this, and we need to close. Inside the defense community, there was this concern of, oh my God, these guys are trying to open the gates of hell. Literal quote. And when they were saying aliens, I know people who say anything that's not here are demons. And this is not just, like family. Like these are people who are in your intelligence community, your defense community, who think this way, who, when they were doing the reports for like the AWOL stuff and like that with Bigelow and everything, like those guys are trying to open the gates of hell. The research that they're doing at Skinwalker Ranch and stuff, they thought it was so weird, so bizarre that it wasn't physics. It was this kind of cult stuff.
Well, and Skinwalker Ranch sounds pretty creepy.
It sounds pretty creepy.
Give it to me.
But they were doing science. But it didn't matter. And like I said, you have many people who are religious, and in their heads, these guys are demons. This is what the Bible prophesied of, etc. You have to negotiate that in your community. That's not 2%.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think it's. Look, I would put it this way. I think there was great, impressing fear, and I think that fear is there even now, about what it means, how the public will ultimately respond. And keep in mind, it's not the 1 year response. It's not, oh, this is interesting, let's party. It's what happens in 5 years.
Yeah, but part of that has to do with the feedback between what the aliens want or who they are. Assuming this universe,
you may not know. That's my point. Think of your political actors right now. Do you trust your political leaders? I already know the answer is no the moment that I answer the question.
I understand, but I'm trying to figure out what you're trying to set me up for.
I'm not trying to set you up for anything. I'm trying to make the point of saying you have a black box. Let's say we have no idea what that is. Black box. It's something there. We know it's there. We know it's superior in technology. We know it's in installations and everything else. And think of the language that is being used. National security, national defense, our nuclear facilities.
Do you think the government would recognize the existence of aliens but refuse to provide any more information on them? Or do you think
they don't have that information? I guess what I'm saying.
Have that information is what you're saying.
Right. What if they
might
don't
just
have
be
that
in the dark
information?
as we are, is what you're saying.
What if they're in the dark? And from the government standpoint, they're in our installations. This seems like they're looking for some kind of security advantage. And it's like, that might be nonsense. Like in their heads, I'm making the point that the context of the world is going to be set by the national security state.
Well, but I get you. That's a specific, and for me, that seems like the less likely. It seems like if we're discovering these things, and if there's a big push to understand them, then it's not going to remain a black box for long or forever or whatever. We're going to be able to get to the bottom of it. It seems more, whatever. This is all likelihood.
It
seems more likely that if we got aliens, we have some idea who they are, what they want. You'd have some means of communication. If they have advanced craft, you'd think they could talk to us in some way.
What if it's a darker reality? What if it's a darker reality?
Well, that's, again, if what ifs were physical, I guess
I'm making the point, Shane. It is a black box. And from
Exactly.
the standpoint of the national security
I
state
hear
who's
you.
looking in that black box
And
and
for-
looking at the void and saying, all right, we
Totally.
have no idea how the
And
public is going to take that. And whatever they do, we're
that black
stuck with
box, it's a Rorschach test for the intelligence community, and we're probably going to, a lot of their takes on it are going to trickle down to us, and we're going to, however they view it,
That's
however they portray
terrifying.
it.
Do you want
we're
to
gonna
look at
respond to it in
the
that way.
world from the standpoint of a CIA agent or of an NSA? No.
But we kind of, I don't know. I don't want to make it, propaganda is crazy these days.
Yes.
But jingoism and even just more than that, tribalism, having your leaders rally around some, inflated enemy, that's as old as sin or whatever.
Exactly. And my feeling is it's going to be shaped around. Let's go to the next one.
We got Brian McDonald on the other side too. On other topics, and I don't want to hold him too long. Brian, great guest. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back, talking about Navalny's orgs, crackdown on Navalny's orgs, as well as the Pentagon and allies drilling naval drills in the Black Sea. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be rejoined on the other side of this break by Brian McDonald, head of the Russia desk at RT Online. We'll be right back on the other side of the short break. Be right back.
Fault lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Brian McDonald. He is head of the Russia desk at RT Online. Follow him on Twitter at 27KHV, 27KHV. Brian, thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon, your time. How are you doing?
Doing very well, Jamarl, Shane. Good morning to you in Washington.
Good morning to you as well. Thank you for being with us. Let's get into it. I want to start with Navalny, although I want to come back to the topic of the Pentagon and the U.S. drilling in the Black Sea. Of course, this also ties up with the conversation we were having last week about the British naval ship that went on a kind of incursion into Crimean naval space. And, there was this sort of notorious, slightly hushed up incident where the Russians sent basically a shot across the bow, sent some ballistics their way, basically, trying to get them to turn course. And of course, that set the stage for what's going on now. Continuation of that with the Pentagon, Ukrainian government, the Brits, and other allies, other, members of this sort of disparate union coming together to drill that. We will be coming back to that. Alexei Navalny, sort of marginal opposition figure in Russian politics, but a major opposition figure as it's portrayed in America in Russian politics. We've made him out to be this sort of big guy standing up to Putin. I want to talk about his organizations, how the Russian government is treating them, various cases here, but maybe we can just set up Alexei Navalny again, and it's been a little while since I've heard from him. Can you please tell us, Brian, from your perspective, who is Alexei Navalny? What role does he play in Russia's current sort of political dynamic? And where is he right now? What's his current status? Brian.
Well, at the moment, he plays no role whatsoever because he's in prison. His organization, which has been declared extremist and effectively banned in Russia, has largely either gone into exile or just basically fallen apart inside the country. Some of his allies, of course, are still in Moscow, but they're not as active as they were before. His right-hand man, Leonid Volkov, moved to Lithuania. For listeners that don't know, it's a small Baltic country bordering Russia in northeastern Europe. And basically, last week, the aforementioned Volkov was in Washington, where he held meetings with, he said over 20 meetings with American officials. They included Mitt Romney, the Republican senator and former failed presidential candidate. And he was very open about that. He posted on Instagram, and as people on the Russia watching beat are saying, the fact that they're being so open now about meeting American politicians and officials basically would suggest they've completely given up on any prospect of becoming involved in the domestic political scene in Russia. So they've now become a sort of, they've now basically openly aligned themselves with the West rather than sort of being accused of being aligned with the West by Putin's team before, or by the establishment in Moscow. So that's where it stands at the moment. Navalny is serving a sentence for breaking his probation last year for a case that involved the French cosmetics manufacturer, or sorry, not manufacturer, distributor and shop chain, store chain, Yves Rocher. So Navalny himself and his team say the charges are politically motivated. They say that he had no choice but to break the parole because he was in Germany getting treatment for the alleged poisoning we all remember last year. So, you know, that's basically the situation. And but Navalny, while he remains a very popular figure in the United States because he can be used obviously in the propaganda or in the information war, and to a lesser extent in Western Europe, domestically has, I wouldn't say fallen off the radar, but certainly is not. I would say that, you know, the opposition that he was involved in, the group he was involved in, are effectively political dead-enders now. And this is an interesting thing as well, Shane, just to take your question a step further. We ran a great op-ed yesterday from Paul Robinson, who's a British professor who teaches in Canada at the University of Ottawa, the Canadian capital. And, you know, he made some really, I urge people to read it. It's on the RT website. And he made the point that the West, by kind of engaging with the Navalny crew and sort of, you know, seeing them as a sort of the only legitimate opposition in Russia, in a way is shooting itself in the foot, because there are forces in Moscow and across Russia who may eventually bring change to Russia, either in the post-Putin era or even within the late Putin era itself. In the same way that, you know, Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin were Communist Party insiders in the 1980s who brought change to the USSR. And the West is not engaging with those people, or is not studying these people, because it's become obsessed with, you know, a fringe opposition group who obviously play along to, you know, what the West would consider to be its agenda in Russia. But it may come back to haunt the West in the end. You know, that it's kind of a bit like the Guaido situation in Venezuela.
Exactly. It's a gamble. It's a gamble. It's basically because
which they're going to lose.
Which they're going to lose. But because if you think about it, the MEK in Iran, it was the same thing, whether West was back in the MEK. And I think it boils down to, yes, there are opposition figures in Russia that may be someone who you could, let's say, work with. The catch being, though, there are no opposition figures in Russia that would be so pliable and that would be so willing to bend over backwards to give it over, to hand over the farm. It's that. And exactly, I think it's Jamarl, what the person represents. Same thing with Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido was willing to kill as many Venezuelans as possible or necessary to get in power. I mean, it's that.
Yeah, you're right. Jamarl, can I just cut in and say, yeah, I mean, the problem is that the West's problem is that the opposition that is, well, there's no particularly strong opposition in opinion polls in Russia, but the forces in Russia who would be likely to come to power after Vladimir Putin and would have enough popularity to, you know, win an election in Russia or to secure power in Russia, none of those people fit the category of, say, a Boris Yeltsin type figure who would bend over for the West or do what he's told or she's told. Yeah. And unless the economy collapses, which doesn't appear to be on the cards given the huge financial reserves Russia has. So really, yeah, I mean, the West is effectively sort of, at this point, like, the West is just basically aligning itself with a particular part of the opposition purely for its own domestic propaganda purposes at this stage, or messaging purposes.
So, okay, on Putin, I want to come back to Putin. We can talk about his direct line yesterday too, but his extensions of his term limits, his, you know, giving himself effectively the ability to stay in office and using that is portrayed as authoritarianism in the West, and I get it. At the same time, though, it's lent Russia a great deal of much-needed stability over the last couple of decades. And of course, I'm guessing, I've never lived there, never even been to Russia, but I'm guessing that's the narrative at home, at least from what I've heard. I'm still curious. Does Putin have any kind of obvious successors? And feel free to disagree with anything I just said or add to it. But has he sort of set up anybody that he's training, any obvious front runners for that position? I'm just curious, within, if there were going to be continuity, if he were sort of going to hand it off to somebody who was, you know, they would themselves be democratically elected, but it would be clear to the public that this was Putin's preferred candidate. Who would that person be maybe a couple of years down the line? Do you see that happening, Brian?
Shane, I'm going to answer your question in two parts. The first part of your question was about the extension of the term limits in the referendum last year.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if you guys follow soccer, football, but I'm sure it pertains in American football as well, and baseball and basketball. In sport, there's often a situation where, as you know, a team can perform very well for a couple of seasons, and the coach can turn around and say, 6 months before the end of the season and say, look, I'm leaving at the end of this term, and the performance levels can drop very quickly. Have you ever noticed that in sport? Because players basically no longer feel they have to perform for the manager because they realize the manager's not going to be around for much longer, And it certainly happens quite a lot in soccer. We just saw it with the German national team at the Euros. I mean, they've been one of the dominant teams in the world over the last decade or even 15 years. And their longtime manager, Joachim Löw, who's been over them since 2006, he said he was leaving at the end of this championship, and they were absolutely awful. They were terrible against England in a game played 2 days ago. Very un-German. So what I'm saying, that links in with Putin as well, because Vladimir Putin, I think, and a lot of people think, that one of the reasons he went for the term limit extension was to avoid a situation where he became a lame duck going into 2024. Because if everybody knew that once the clock turned midnight on, say, I don't know the exact date, but let's say it was the 2nd of May, 2024, that's the end for Vladimir Putin as a politician, it would have allowed a lot of, intrigues to start and a lot of infighting in Moscow. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it would have made Putin a lame duck for, maybe not now, but certainly going into 2022, 2023. I think he wanted to avoid that. I don't seriously think that Vladimir Putin is going to stay in power until 2036, which he theoretically could do under the new rules. I think, although the funny thing is that if he stayed in power until then, he would be about the same age that Joe Biden will be at the end of his first term in the U.S.
Yeah, he's looking older, but he's still pretty young. He's 68 right now.
I saw him at the hearing, at the
68,
at the summit. Yeah, and I mean, you look, you could do a comparison between the two men. One is vigorous, the other one is a wisp of
water. Well, I don't want to get hard on Joe Biden like that. I think there's a lot of commentary on Joe Biden slips into kind of ageism, and that I don't like. I think Biden's a lot sharper than people think he is, to be honest with you. I saw him.
That's reassuring in its own way.
I saw him taking questions about Ukraine one day a few weeks ago, and I thought he was very sharp. Far more erudite than Donald Trump would have been about the same subject. I can tell you that for sure.
Well, but Biden knew it too. Biden knew it too. I mean, Brian, we've only got so much time with you.
And he's a bit frail, but that does not mean that he's gone in the head or anything. I don't like that.
I don't think he's, look, Brian, to be clear, I don't think he's gone in the head. And from the standpoint of his ability to do politics, from the standpoint of his political instincts. Yeah, it's so it's not that.
I think he's close to it. He is closer to it. I think that
he is not. I mean, it's just, if you look at him,
you can have moments of remarkable lucidity as an old person. At the same time, a lot of the time, you're going to be at a lower baseline level of function than you were as a younger
adult. There's no doubt that he's not the vigorous man he was.
Yeah, exactly.
Jamarl, I wasn't casting aspersions on you there at all.
No, cast aspersions. It's fault lines. It's what we do.
Fault lines. But Brian, we got to.
Could I just say one thing just to finish the answer to the question?
Please.
Is that so? What I'm trying to say is that even though he would only be 1 year older than Biden will be at the end of this term, come 2036. I don't see it going that long. I think that, the history in Russia, older listeners will remember Leonid Brezhnev, Viktor Andropov, Konstantin Chernenko in the 80s, and all the Soviet leaders started dying dropping like flies because they were so old. I don't think Putin wants to go back to that. So to answer your question, Shane, has he got a successor? There's no obvious candidate at the moment, but I would imagine that listeners should look out for people in their 40s or late 30s who are appointed to positions of responsibility over the coming years. At the moment, there's one person that sticks out. That is Dmitry Patrushev. He's the Minister for Agriculture. He's about 42 years of age. His father, Nikolai, is essentially the Russian version of the Director of National Security that you have in the States. So he's obviously kind of, elite, establishment elite, royalty. So he could be someone to watch out for, or it could be somebody else. But I would be looking out for people in their 40s. I don't think Putin will pick an older person because I think he will want someone that can, serve for quite some time.
He's aware of the generational thing. And looking back at the Soviet Union, what you were talking about with that older generation, if you don't have a generation of leaders to take over from the previous generation, then you get decline.
Yes.
You can, and it breaks off. I would imagine also, Putin comes across to me as a person with this notion of, okay, my job is to shepherd Russia through aggressive and a hostile world, especially from the standpoint of a Western context, and to keep it whole and safe, especially after Yeltsin years, where that is my job, that is my mission. When I wake up in the morning, when I go to bed at night, that's my job. That's what I'm going to do. And recognize that there's going to be hostilities from the standpoint of propaganda, hostilities from the standpoint of encroachment upon borders and everything else, and yet my job is to keep it whole. And so this notion of a successor, I don't even think that's in the headspace. And maybe if it is in the headspace, the person, I would imagine, he would have to choose somebody with the same mindset. And it becomes difficult to do that, meaning he was there for the Yeltsin years. He was there for it. The person who he chooses on some level may know it, but does it dig in them in such a way when they wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, we are not going back to that. We're going to expand our lot. We're going to make sure that this country is safe. Like, who is that person? And is the person who you're thinking about, is it that guy? And how would he know it's that guy?
But that seems like a difficult. It seems like that could be a culture within the administration. It seems like if there's this sense.
Does it make sense?
Basically everything that you just said. It might not be restricted to one person. Brian, I'm kind of out of my depth here. What's your take on Jamarl's?
Well, I mean, there's an American example of this, actually. I mean, I'm an outsider in America, but I often get the feeling that Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and the current sort of, Democratic leadership in America were all basically sort of proteges of Edward Kennedy to an extent. I don't know if you ever noticed that. I mean, there's a certain kind of line that runs through it. I mean, Biden was obviously close to the Kennedys. Kennedy endorsed Obama, for example, brought him along. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a bit of that in Russia as well. I mean, like Yeltsin, to answer Jamarl's point there about, the last thing that Yeltsin actually said to Putin when he handed over power 21 years ago, originally, he said, "Look after Russia, please." Yeah. That was his exact word. So yes, Putin does see himself as this guy looking after Russia. And that is why I don't believe that he's going to allow a power vacuum to exist after he quits. Because if you go back to Russian history, we've had cases where a leader has died unexpectedly, like Stalin, for example. It was Soviet history. Stalin wasn't even Russian. He was Georgian. And that led to a power struggle between, Beria and Khrushchev and so on and so forth. We had a power struggle in Khrushchev's time when Brezhnev took over. In the 80s, we had a crazy time when, they all started dropping like flies, like I said. So I don't think that's the road he's going to be going down. You also mentioned the Defender, the British ship that was in Russian waters last week, the HMS Defender. That was an interesting case. I think Putin made a comment yesterday that I just found it interesting. He said that he believes that had Russia sank that British ship, it would not have led to World War III. So what he's basically saying by that, I think, is that the Americans, and he also said the Americans were involved in it as well, the British and Americans are doing a lot of posturing around NATO and Russia, but he doesn't believe that, that their threats are backed up with substance, and he clearly doesn't believe that NATO would actually implement Article 5 if push came to shove.
Do you think he's right?
I don't know about that. I mean, you're I'm not even from a NATO country, but you guys as Americans will be better.
Yeah, I think he's wrong. I think we get
wrong. Oh man, he's
okay.
So
We'll
wrong.
ask you a question then. I'll ask you a question. If Russia had sank the British ship last week,
yes.
Do you think the United States would have launched strikes against Russia?
Yes.
You really do. That would mean the end of the world.
Yes, I do know. Yes, I know that would be the end of the world. And here's why. Because it's culture and ideology. And at a certain point, you build up so much hysteria around something that the political leader is stuck. He has no choice but to sleepwalk himself into a war. There's no backstop. There's no way for him to back away from the hardliners. Those guys are going to boost themselves up to such a degree. It's like, what is the president going to do?
Slouching towards Bethlehem.
In any conventional war fought in Europe, Russia's going to win. It's pretty clear because America just wouldn't be able to get the numbers.
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter.
And second of all, even if America was somehow able to win the war, the Russians would just use their nukes.
No, I know that. Like, I totally know that.
You're going to get fried,
Jamarl. I know all of that. They know all of that. And I'm going to say some guy's going to walk in, some steel jaw guy with a war plan that says, here's the way to win the war. He's going to be entirely wrong. And I guess my point is, whether they launch strikes.
But do you think they're really going to risk New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C.
They were before.
being turned into radioactive swamps?
I'll tell you this. Daniel Ellsberg made the point that the United States were willing to use nukes to defend Taiwan against China. There was no way that would have worked in regards to winning that war. They would have just started a war. And even from the standpoint of nuclear war with Russia, they had guys during the Cuban Missile Crisis that would have said, look, we would lose this coast. However, we would win it because we have more nukes and we can win this war right now.
Well, actually, Russia has more nukes. So
look, I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you. In the past, that was on the table. And if that was on the table in the past, it's just because there's so much hysteria around NATO. I have a hard time believing that they would back away. Now, whether that's okay, here's a minor strike and we can back away from it and both of us save face. It might be that, but but nothing, no response. I don't buy the no response stuff.
I have to disagree. I can't see a war between the United States and Russia. If you look at what's happened since World War II, which is now 80 years now at this stage, every war between Moscow and the U.S. has been fought by proxy.
No, that's fair.
I mean, the Moscow armed the Viet Cong.
But Russia sinking a British ship is different. Russia sinking a British ship would be different. I don't see, because think of it this way. What happens the moment that happens? Russia sinks a British ship. What takes place? What do you think happens immediately?
Hysteria.
Outright, utter, unmitigated hysteria.
But not just in Britain. A destructive war.
Okay, now you're in hysteria. Let's stay there. What's next? What,
airstrikes on St. Petersburg?
No. That's not going to happen next. It's going to be hysteria. But what do you think happens? Think of the political theater that takes place.
Yeah, but America would have to make the first strike because Russia would already have blown up the boat. Russia's not going to do anything else unless it gets attacked. So what is America going to do? Is it going to send the Air Force to Sochi? Hope not.
Hope not. And the aircraft carriers getting to the Strait of Marmara, I don't know about that, but no.
I just don't see no response. I don't buy the no response stuff.
I don't buy the no response thing either. But I wanted to. We only have a couple minutes left with you, Brian. I'm sad to say I think we're a bit more pessimistic on you than this one. I hope you're right. I got 100% swear.
I 1,000% hope I'm wrong.
I hope you were correct.
I so hope I'm wrong.
But one last thing: Direct Line, this big annual media event yesterday. We don't have analog to this in the United States. Can you explain what is this annual event? It seems like a Q&A, basically.
I love it.
Television Q&A with Vladimir Putin, and specifically with yesterday's Direct Line with Putin. What was the atmosphere? What was his attitude, Brian?
God, what is Direct Line? It's not dissimilar from the town hall meetings that some politicians have in the States. As I understand, the format of the town hall meetings is that people can come and ask them questions in a kind of open forum, yeah?
That's it.
Well, obviously, it's not quite as open as that, but it's because it's a nationwide event, and obviously the, questions are kind of, about 2 million questions were sent in or something, and obviously he only answered maybe, I don't know exactly, 60, 70, 80 of them. So, well, it's an event that goes on for between 3 and 4 hours annually, and he answers questions from all over the country. They can be about stuff that wouldn't interest you guys at all, like, the sewerage system in Chelyabinsk, or, Russian mortgage interest rates, or access to mortgages, for example, or access to social housing. Or it can be about serious, geopolitical stuff, or, things like that. So the geopolitical element of it yesterday was mainly centered around Ukraine and the US. The domestic stuff was, it was largely about the COVID-19 situation. I don't know if your listeners are aware, but the COVID, unfortunately, the Delta variant, which came from India, has sort of
it's been spreading. It's been a big problem
led to
there.
A resurgence in COVID here.
Yeah, you've had
600 and something
in a
deaths.
Single day. I think you've had a couple days in a row in the past few days of your highest case count on a daily basis in Russia, right?
Yeah, because basically the problem is reluctance to take the vaccine. I mean, I know this sounds crazy to American ears, but vaccines have been widely available, free of charge here since January.
Yeah.
And the authorities have kind of gone out of their way to make it possible to get them. I mean,
And yet
here in
people are
Sochi,
still
you can get it in
resistant.
a local shopping center. For
I'm sorry, I've got to cut in because we need to close here. That's sad to hear. Great conversation, as always. Astute guest, Brian McDonald, head of the Russia desk at RT Online. Brian, thanks for joining us. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, going into our hour break, coming back in just a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited cosmos. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. About 13,777 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 287 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 11,466 cases per day, a decrease of 10% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 47% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 54% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 33,632,070 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 604,356 human beings. Less people died yesterday than in Chicago over the weekend, Shane. No, okay, that's wrong. That's a grim joke, and yet partially, on some level, true in some way.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. The World Health Organization has warned there will be another wave of COVID across Europe unless countries begin to take rigorous precautions. The warnings comes after cases are rising across the continent after more than 2 months of decline. Wow. Indonesia is imposing coronavirus lockdowns starting this Saturday in order to try to curtail COVID, which is affecting Indonesia more than any other country in Southeast Asia. Thailand's prime minister said the reopening of the Holiday Island Phuket to foreigners is a risk, but one his citizens need to accept. Starting today, foreign travelers will be able to travel to the island without quarantining for the first time in 16 months. Prayo Chayo Cha is using Phuket as a sandbox for the tourist sites in the country. Due to the fact it's an island, Phuket serves as a useful experiment for reopening tourism. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment. I'm sorry, I have to stop there for a moment. They're using an island as a sandbox because it's self-contained. Mm-hmm. So if anything happens, like a zombie apocalypse, they can keep it relegated to the island. That's what I'm understanding.
That's always the move.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what okay. I just want to make sure that that's what I'm understanding.
And they're worried specifically about the zombie apocalypse.
Yes.
They said that in the press release.
Right. In the press release. Right in the document. Charges against the Trump Organization CFO, and that has been taking place. Right. And the gentleman, I can't think of the guy's name.
Alan Weisenberg?
Weisenberg has apparently turned himself in, if I'm understanding it correctly. But yes, indictments have been handed down. No, this is not necessarily directly at Trump. Yes, the guy is they were trying to put pressure on the gentleman to go after Trump. Why else would they? I mean, ultimately, they're trying to work their way up, eventually get to Trump. That's my thought. I mean, we could talk about it with Ted, but yes, this is political. Doesn't mean he's not guilty. Both of those things can be true at once. Donald Rumsfeld has dropped dead at the age of 88. He hit the floor for the last time, and this world is 1 ounce, 1 increment of whatever that material brighter now that he is not here. I would take a special stance in saying this because Shane here is a better person than I am. I wouldn't say something like this. His dad hated saying stuff like this, but I will say that. because I see no issue when a person has lived a horrible, miserable life that has done horrible, miserable things. So a lot of people that when that person drops dead, it is my right to dance on their graves.
Let's come back to it.
Yeah, let's come back to it. He served twice as Secretary of Defense, once under Gerald Ford and once under George W. Bush Jr. The judge in Britney Spears' case has denied her request to be removed from a conservatorship managed by her father, which she and her fans say has been used in abusive, traumatizing ways. Chinese President Xi Jinping has warned that foreign powers will have their heads bashed if they try to bully China, saying that the Chinese people have created their own world. Xi Jinping said these words during the huge centenary celebration of forming the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping has repeated a long-standing Chinese promise to integrate Taiwan. We also have Bill Cosby, who was released yesterday. This release had to do with basically a technicality. This was, if I'm not mistaken, in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And yeah, Bill Cosby, CNN followed him going home, followed his car, followed him getting out of his car and going into his house. As you know, Bill Cosby had been basically convicted of date raping a large sum of women, basically drugging them and having sex with them, etc. And this took place over the course of apparently decades. Bill Cosby used his basic fame to protect Bill Cosby from prosecution, or for that matter, from even having any aspersions even cast against them on this very specific issue. But that's it. Justice has been upheld, I guess, in a strict legal sense of the term. And Bill Cosby is out. Those are your headlines. You're listed in the Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's go back to, I guess it's one that I was greatly
Donald Rumsfeld.
bothered by. Donald Rumsfeld. Look, the Iraq War, our world is set in that context. And no, I don't believe Donald Rumsfeld in and of himself started the war, because Donald Rumsfeld would not have the power to do that. He is a weapon. He is not necessarily the person wielding the weapon. By the same token, he did prosecute that war. And in prosecution of that war, this was never like McNamara had a come to Jesus moment when McNamara finally broke down and realized, oh my God, what I am doing is horrible. There was a person who came to McNamara's office and set himself on fire in front of McNamara's office. Did you know this? Robert
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And in doing this, it was this thing of like, whoa, this guy cared about this issue that much.
Yeah.
He didn't want to kill himself in any other way where he's going to hurt anybody else. The only thing he had to give was himself, his body, and he put that in the most theatrical of ways to get across. Is this guy nuts? Or does this matter that much? Meaning, is he super sane or is he nuts? And you can make a case for either way, right? You can make a case one way or the other. But in this very specific case, McNamara, this stuff had to come to Jesus moment. And he realized this notion of like, if I would have sat across from the other person and just talked to him, I would have realized that his point of view of the world is different from my own, even though he is not insane. And within the context of that, we can come to some understanding. And we had different even framings of what the world was. It was that. Hence, war. And McNamara was like, oh my God, 2 million of these people died because of this stupid reason. It was that. Like, it's like this shattering thing that this notion, he had to document it, Fog of War.
Yeah.
Rumsfeld, though, prosecuted that. So it's like, how do you weigh the life of an individual when they've prosecuted a war that killed 1 million people? How do you prosecute? You're like, and not just, push for it. It wasn't like he was, oh, I'm forced to do it. It wasn't that. It wasn't that. What are your thoughts? I don't want to.
I think Glenn Greenwald has a good take on this that I don't fully agree with, but that was it changed my view on it slightly. Where he's going over this is an older article of his. I think he wrote it in The Guardian back in 2013, and he reposted it based on the Rumsfeld death. I hadn't read this before. Good piece by him. He's talking about, and this is what sort of, it didn't change my mind, but it's added a perspective. These people, Rumsfeld, I think he wrote it on Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, when she passed away.
Yeah.
These people, broadly, they're going to be a slew of the population, a minority certainly, who are very supportive, who are like, these people were practically saints. They tried their hardest. They did their best at protecting them, etc. And there are a bunch of people, maybe a similar number of people who hate these people's guts, whether it's Thatcher or Rumsfeld or whatever. because they see the terrible things that they did. And while the first group is writing hagiographies of these people, while the first group is treating them as saints and giving them the most revering language ever, the second group is basically prevented from talking because the person just died. And so in the very process where this person has moved from a living entity into a historical entity, if that makes sense, they're becoming a part of history, and the sort of perspective on them is being changed. You don't want to just hear the good things, because if they've done bad things, you want to hear those too. Yes. It's very simple, because you want to have the sort of feelings about this person right. You want to have the takes on this person be right, so that we learn things and we learn from our past. And, you know, it gets philosophical anyway. I like that line from Glenn Greenwald. I think it applies. And that's why he's sometimes scathing of people who've just passed away, because, you know, many other people are laudatory and he wants to be honest. And I get that. At the same time, there is something about decency or whatever. There's something about, and this is probably what I get from my dad, there's also something about my inherent inability to fundamentally judge the contents of a person's soul, or to say anything about what they were as a person, which is, in a weird way, even though I'm like an agnostic.
Of a person's soul. Yes. I love that. That's so damning.
Well, but it's true. I don't know. And there's an optimism in me that says that people are people who try their darndest.
What's in their soul? What's in their soul?
I was just getting to it.
Does what's in their soul matters?
Of course. And I was just getting to it.
Go for it. I'm sorry.
People do their damnedest to either to live good lives, and it gets tautological after a little bit, either to live good lives or to make their families happy or to make themselves happy or whatever. But we're just animals. We're just animals who are born into this planet. None of us asked to be born. We're all thrust here, whatever. And then what do we do with it? Some people turn into psychopaths and serial killers. And I would like to think that even for the worst of us, you can have a little empathy or something like that set aside, where it's like, okay, this person was an absolute mass murderer. Now let's diagnose what happened here and try to empathize with them and understand where they're coming from. And I guess it's that attitude that I'd like to bring to Donald Rumsfeld and his ilk. But
I don't know what is Donald Rumsfeld's soul.
Yes.
I don't even know if a person has a soul. I know what he did.
Exactly.
That's all I know.
I hear you.
And in the context of what he did, I can judge that by a certain value set: good, bad, indifferent, etc.
And it's fair to judge.
It is fair to judge. And from the standpoint of what his actions were. That's all I can judge. That's all any of us can judge. I don't know what's in the individual soul. In fact, from the standpoint of a little bit of logic that's working at all, is there a soul at all if it's just a little bit of logic? And is that soul that little bit of logic? I guess the thing is, I can only judge what Donald Rumsfeld did. And what he did was horrendous. It was horrendous. And he had no regrets. Right here. He said, out of office, he wrote a book, memoir, Known and Unknown. And he says more than 4 years out of office, still expressed no regrets over the decision to invade Iraq, which had cost the United States more than $700 billion. Oh, no, $700 billion back then. Yeah. Back then. We're talking, trillions at this point? What, $5 trillion or something?
But the money shouldn't be the first focus. It's the lives lost.
Well, and 4,400 Americans' lives lost. The wild part about this is...
It's not the American lives.
Exactly. But that's what the New York Times brings up. It's the million Iraqis.
Yeah.
It's the next country that went invaded because of the original pretext of Iraq. They went into Syria on the pretext of Iraq.
Yes.
Let's put that in perspective, right? So when I'm like, okay, 500,000 in Syria, 1 million in Iraq, how many in Afghanistan, or how many in Libya, because all of these things were just one after the next, like Plinko chips on their way trying to get to Iran. So when I think about this, and I think of Rumsfeld, I don't think of Rumsfeld from the standpoint of, okay, I don't know what's in his soul. He might have had a beautiful soul that was just tarnished by this brutal, vicious world. Here's the thing, all of us are living in this brutal, vicious world. And all of us are stuck figuring out what we do based on our value set and everything else. His value set was killing 1 million Iraqis is perfectly fine. Fine.
It's true. And
it's okay.
And don't you want to understand,
regrets.
How the hell does somebody get into their mind that that's an appropriate thing to do or an appropriate way to conduct themselves?
Look, I get it. Society is screwed up.
But do you get what mental motions do you have to go through to get there? I don't get that. I wish I could, because it might help me to understand some people and prevent these things from happening in the future. And that's kind of where I'm getting here. Mere condemnation without understanding is mere condemnation without understanding, and it does not. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm not trying to paint a straw man about you.
No, I am condemning. Yes,
you are.
I am
but
condemning.
I think that you also, and anyway,
I'm condemning.
I get it, and I don't blame you.
And
I don't blame you for
I do get it when I make an argument that says, society throws a person away without necessarily, like a judge. A judge will say, you're a horrible person, and throw the guy in jail. And in some way, in the judge doing it, it's absolving itself of the blame and everything else, because that judge is representing this kind of societal structure, and the judge is throwing the guy away and say, hey, we're clean, it's that person's fault, and we're judging this. No, buddy, that's a veil of sorts. No, that person who was born into a particular system. That person wasn't etched that way. That person became that way because of how you are, meaning that judge, the representation of society is. The society is trying to we didn't do anything wrong in this nonsense. The society made that person who that person is. So the same thing with Rumsfeld, right? The society made the person who that person is. But the fact that the judge exists on some level gets across that, hey, there's a default. There's a range of behaviors that we expect, or at the very least should expect in an individual, even when they're going through adverse circumstances. And the same thing applies to Rumsfeld. And it wasn't just adverse circumstances. He was gifted with it all. He had it all. And so it wasn't like this person was in depravity and everything else. This person had it all and still came away with the decision that I have the right to dictate what other people are, even to the point of death, if needs be.
That is politics, though. I mean, I'm just sad to say it's true, man.
Head,
that is the nature of politics. And yeah, Rumsfeld did some bad. Here's the thing.
And look,
Rumsfeld did a bunch of bad crap.
It made him insane. You can say that the society made him insane.
And I'm not even arguing that you shouldn't be criticizing. That's the weird thing. Is I'm not saying you shouldn't criticize him or people shouldn't criticize him now or then. Now that he's dead, it doesn't matter a whit to me. All I'm saying is that, and if I'll use the word like spiritual, on the level of my, again, this gets weird and abstract, but like, this is another human being. And if I am willing to detach myself from this human being and condemn them without understanding them, is that not exactly the same dehumanization that people like Rumsfeld use against millions of people around the world to justify anything against them? I guess my point is, I'm a Western traditionalist. I feel like we're all people. We can all understand each other. We should try to. It's for the good of humanity in the world. And I will damn well condemn somebody, but I also want to get where they're coming from. And I can do the exact same, I can do both of those things at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yes, you can do both of those things at the same time. And at the end of the day, we are just people. And as such, there are certain things in our society that we say should be off the table in regards to behavior and us engaging with one another. And part of the thing in understanding one another and this notion of, okay, how do we prevent this from going forward?
You gotta
how
criticize
did this person become insane, etc.?
You gotta be willing to criticize it.
And willing to criticize, not just criticize, but being willing to take steps in a society to prevent people like that from getting insane in the first place. Meaning, maybe the great wealth shouldn't be appropriated. Maybe, as a society, we say, hey, you shouldn't have the right to knock over a country, killing 1 million people in the process of doing so, and then after the fact, chest thump the fact that you did it, saying nothing here, no issue, no issue. Meaning, what do we do to take steps to prevent that person from existing? And we won't be doing anything like that. We didn't even put Bush in prison. Like, if you put it in perspective. And so, condemnation, ridicule, this kind of weak, this weak.
That's the enforcement mechanism.
That's all you have.
You don't kill them. It's not like we send out
I'm saying you
of
can't
vigilantes.
even, like, the society doesn't even do anything about it in real terms.
That's what I'm saying. And again, criticism is, I think, how you deal with this stuff. So to be extremely clear, I just personally wouldn't do it. Just because, like, whatever. I'll put it like this. And maybe this doesn't even make sense. But I will. We're going to be talking with Scott here. In fact, we're overdue to talk with Scott, so I'm going to go into our break. We're going to be talking with Scott about Donald Rumsfeld, and I will be critical of him. But, you know, I'll try to hold to a line or something like that. I guess that's where I fall in this stuff. Anyway, we're going to be joined by Scott Ritter on the other side of this break, former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower. We're going to be talking about Donald Rumsfeld dead and airstrikes before Biden meets with Ashraf Ghani. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars. Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate. No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary. I see what you did there. Yep. Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320. And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, You can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us the like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So Shane and I were having a conversation about Donald Rumsfeld. I think it was a great conversation. And in fact, I turned to him and was like, hey, that was a great back and forth. I always enjoyed those. It's rigorous back and forth in regards to talking about any particular topic. But in this case, it's Rumsfeld. And I am very clear on my perspective of Rumsfeld, even though I could get this notion of how did the person become the way the person became. Look, I don't know what's in the soul of a person. I do know that Rumsfeld was responsible, or at the very least helped largely in the killing a million Iraqis, to put it mildly, not to mention the other wars that took place as a result of it, not to mention 4,000 Americans, and not to mention spending $7 trillion to do it, and to be unrepentant after the fact. To have a conversation about Donald Rumsfeld, to get his take on it, especially since on some level he was there, we're joined with Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons MD weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. You can follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. Scott, thank you for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Donald Rumsfeld, let's just get your take on Donald Rumsfeld. I mean, this kind of, like Shane said, this kind of part of history at this point. The way it's a strange way at which the way the person, as the life seeps out of a person, that the more life seeps into the thing of this being historic. But what is your take on Donald Rumsfeld? He was a real physical matter, reality person. And I think he should be looked at that way as to be, I guess, a lesson in history of sorts. What is your take? What are your thoughts?
I mean, Donald Rumsfeld and my path crossed a couple times. So I have more than just a long-distance observation of the man. I can't say that we're intimate, that I know him as a close personal friend. But, my path first crossed with Rumsfeld indirectly when I was in Iraq as a weapons inspector. And I was interviewing Wafiq Samurai, who was the head of Iraqi military intelligence. And he spoke of the importance, the criticality of Rumsfeld's two visits to Baghdad in the 1980s where he met with Saddam the first time, and the second time, began a process of facilitating intelligence sharing that helped Iraq break the back of the Iranians eventually. Wafiq Samurai talked about how the United States provided critical targeting intelligence about Iranian positions on the Al-Fa Peninsula that were used with America's knowledge to target chemical weapons that destroyed the Iranian defensive positions and allowed the Iraqis to recapture that peninsula. And the irony of that is that Rumsfeld's two visits in the 1980s were both in the context of America expressing its concern over Iraq's continued use of chemical weapons and its war against Iran. So right off the bat, we see an element of hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with Donald Rumsfeld. He's a major league player in the American establishment who is representing the United States at the highest level. He went to Iraq as President Reagan's envoy, and everything about his visit was hypocritical. On the one hand, trying to be seen as having concern and condemnation over Iraq's chemical weapons use, but on the other hand, facilitating the use of chemical weapons to achieve an American policy objective, which was to bring harm to Iran. So, that was my universe of Donald Rumsfeld. When I resigned from the United Nations and I testified before the United States Senate, I was raked over the coals by Joe Biden and others. Donald Rumsfeld sent me a personal letter, praising my performance, calling me a great American hero, and then inviting me to participate in. He had been appointed to do a ballistic missile survey. That is basically to present a paper on the ballistic missile threat in the world. And I was invited to come in and talk about Iraq's ballistic missile capability.
Okay, so wait a second. I want to pause on this for a second, Scott, because I'm trying to interpret it, what exactly that invitation represents.
Yeah.
Is this like you blowing a whistle, sort of being cast up by the political system, and Rumsfeld thinking, okay, here's a hand. If I give him a hand up, maybe he'll re-enter, but in my wing or something, and he'll be on my side. That's my, naive interpretation, sophomoric maybe. What's the deal there, Scott? What happened? Why did he do that, you think?
Well, when I resigned, people like to hear what they want to hear. That's always the case. And when I resigned, I was being very critical of the U.S. government's position on Iraq, mainly that we weren't being allowed to do our job, we being UN weapons inspectors, and that the U.S. government, having created the weapons inspection process, was now preventing us from completing our mission, and therefore we had a situation where we had built this universe that said so long as Iraq hasn't been verified as being disarmed, it represents a threat to the international community. That's a Chapter 7 resolution. I don't make this stuff up. That was the Security Council resolution voted by the United States. So Iraq is a threat. That threat comes from weapons of mass destruction. Weapons inspectors were created to disarm Iraq, to eliminate that threat, and the United States is blocking the inspectors from doing their job.
Which means that the threat is ever present.
And the United States wants to keep that threat around, basically.
That is astonishingly.
Of course, because it was never.
That is so good.
It wasn't about the threat. The United States knew that had we completed our job, we would have found Iraq to be disarmed. And then sanctions would have to be lifted, and Saddam Hussein would be allowed to exist.
No, it's deeper than that, Scott. It's deeper than that. I mean, it's almost like saying, all right, this country is a threat. We can't justify an attack on that country just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the country, we're going to try to disarm it. And we're going to create an organ with a specific interest in doing that, to do that job. Now, we've created this premise of the world that basically said, all right, this organ is going to ensure that this country is safe by doing a weapons inspection. But we are no longer going to allow that organ to do its job. And while the organ can't do its job, it remains a threat, meaning the entire point of creating you was to make the threat work. I hope does that make sense? Like meaning your very existence was the thing that allowed, that justified the war. Because the world was set up on this notion that unless you did your job, Iraq was a threat. But you were never allowed to do your job, meaning we were never going to allow you to do the thing that you were there to do. And because you were never allowed to do it, this is a threat. It's a sense of logic of sorts, but the logic allows itself to basically instantiate a war. That is wild. That is astonishing politics.
War. I'm just telling you, it wasn't about war at the beginning. It was about letting Saddam's regime collapse from within by continuing the pressure of economic sanctions. And the proof positive of this is in 1992, when we were blocked, or 1992, when my team was blocked outside a ministry that contained the archives of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs that they were hiding from us, rather than supporting us, rather than going back and invoking the Chapter 7 resolution that said if Iraq fails to comply, the war will continue. Because if they wanted to go to war, that was the time to do it, right then. Right then, we had them.
Well, how did we, this is a history lesson that we wouldn't be taught in schools, but it's the kind of thing somebody who'd been at this for longer would probably know, and I don't. I'm just going to go to you on this, Scott. The way that the United States and British governments supported Hussein, supported Iraq, like you're saying, you used him as a tool, and yet simultaneously, it seemed turned from wanting to do that to destabilizing him, bringing the government down, eventually invading him, launching this long, long war that, we're still, of course, engaged in by weird sort of extent. What happened? What is the, why did that policy change? In other words, how did the United States government and the British government see Iraq in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s? Why did we see them as useful at some points and cease to see them as useful at others? I hope this makes sense. I'm just trying to get a sense of, the weather vane keeps changing its direction or whatever. So why are they blowing the wind in certain directions? Why are they responding to, why are they changing their take on Iraq as they did so often, it seems? Scott.
Oil. I just said oil. We supported Iraq in the 1980s because we wanted to continue the flow of Iraqi oil out of the Middle East. The Iranians were shutting down the Shat al-Arab. The Syrians just shut down a pipeline. The oil wasn't flowing. We didn't want a repeat of the energy crisis of the 1970s. So we supported Saddam Hussein. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the tables were turned all of a sudden. We now saw Iraq as threatening regional oil stability by capturing Kuwait and absorbing Kuwaiti oil production into their own, and then being able to threaten the eastern Saudi oil fields. So that's why we suddenly changed our tune and said we're going to intervene on the side of Kuwait. But even then, we haven't passed the point of no return. It's just when President Bush had to justify the use of force, he couldn't. When it first happened, the Bush administration was very honest when Iraq invaded Kuwait. They said, this is about oil. And then the American public went, we ain't dying for oil. So now they had to change the tune. And in October of 1990, President Bush in Cincinnati, Ohio, gave a speech where he said Saddam Hussein is the Middle East equivalent of Adolf Hitler, and it's time he needs to be removed and provided with Nuremberg-like retribution, which means regime change. Hold him accountable, hang him by the neck until dead. That's what the Gulf War was supposed to deliver. We didn't deliver that. Saddam survived. Then the CIA said, well, we don't think he'll last more than 6 months if we keep the sanctions that were imposed when he invaded Kuwait in place. But now the sanctions were supposed to be lifted when Kuwait was liberated. So we needed a new excuse. That was weapons of mass destruction. The inspectors went in not to disarm Iraq, but to create the impression of a non-compliant Iraq, to sustain sanctions until Saddam was overthrown. We didn't want to go back to war back then. That's why I'm telling you, in the summer of 1992, when we surrounded the archive, they should have pulled us out and blown that country to hell. That's what they should have done. They didn't. Instead, they pulled us out, humiliated us, passed another resolution telling the Iraqis, oh, you have to comply. Then they sent us back in with the mission of hunting down hidden weapons, not telling the Iraqis you have to turn over the hidden weapons or else, but by saying we're going to create a process that will never end. And that's what happened. And so when I resigned, I was holding a mirror up saying, your process is screwed up. You're not letting us do our job, and I'm not going to play this game anymore. Rumsfeld, believing my testimony was an attack on the Clinton administration, the Democrats, not recognizing that it was an attack on American policy, wrote a letter, called me a great American hero, invited me to be a part of this ballistic missile investigation.
And thank you for bringing it back to that. That is the explanation. He saw you as a useful political tool for hitting the Democrats, but you were kind of indicting the whole thing. Your attitude going into this, thank you for laying that out, by the way. That is a very useful, sort of refreshingly brief but useful summary of the chain of events here. I'm just curious personally, how did your perspective change going into this situation? Because I'm imagining you figured out that you weren't supposed to do the job they're paying you to do, they brought you in to do, while you were on the job. There was a process of discovery or something like that. What did you learn? What triggered you learning those lessons? How did that go? If I'm laying it out briefly, Scott, what was that process like for you?
Well, I mean, I knew from the start the United States was lying. It was clear from day one as weapons inspector we weren't going to be allowed to do our job. When the then Secretary of State James Baker, in the spring of 1991, said, even if Iraq complies with its obligation to disarm, sanctions won't be lifted until it's time Saddam Hussein is removed from power. And Tariq Aziz threw that back into our face. He was the deputy prime minister, the number one foreign policy guy in Saddam's regime, threw it back in our face and said, why should we cooperate with you? The Americans have said, even if we do everything you ask, sanctions won't be lifted. So we were hit with that quandary, the hypocrisy of the American position from day one. But as inspectors operating under a United Nations Security Council resolution, we can't get involved in the individual policy battles of individual states. My job and the other job of the other inspectors was to implement faithfully the Security Council resolutions calling for the disarmament of Iraq. That's what we tried to do. The politics is left to the other nations. What I'll say, though, is that I gave Rumsfeld a bite of the apple, meaning I said, okay, you call me a great American, you believe in my integrity, you invite me to this commission, and I worked with them. And I told them that, we could see a situation where Iraq in a period of 6 months could reconstitute a so-called long-range ballistic missile capability. That is, missiles with a range greater than 150 kilometers that could reach Israel. They could reconstitute that, but we had pretty much destroyed their infrastructure. I laid out the truth about it. The commission report says Iraq represents a looming threat to the international community and could soon build intercontinental range ballistic missiles. So they lied. They don't want the truth. They abused my participation, and that's when I realized Donald Rumsfeld is an absolute piece of garbage. And then I watched this man who lied. I mean, I knew he was a hypocrite from his position in Iraq beforehand about chemical weapons. Now I know that he's a liar because he misrepresented the information I provided his commission. And then I watch him after 9/11 panic and basically take America, which is already a bully nation, and all constraints are removed. And we see not only do they go into Afghanistan, but worse, they use 9/11 as a justification to attack Iraq. Illegal war of aggression, millions of people dead, thousands of Americans killed, trillions of dollars wasted. There's a space in hell for Donald Rumsfeld, right-hand side of the devil, and I hope he's sitting there right now burning.
Exactly. That's my point. I don't know what's in his soul. I know what he did. That's what and liar, and like you said, war criminal, and I mean, took the country into a war, like and on the pretext of a lie at that. No consequences while he was here.
Be another story here.
Go for it.
As Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld knew leading up to the war with Iraq that the intelligence wasn't there.
So did Nancy Pelosi, by the way. Let's just be very clear. Nancy Pelosi said, I saw the intelligence. I knew that Bush was lying. She said that.
So, good. So she needs to rot in hell, too. But the point is, he created an office of, I think, special projects. Douglas Feith headed it up. And their job was to cherry pick until, I as an intelligence officer, in my safe of all the information that's collected, I have reports that say just about anything you want them to say, because most intelligence is just crap. It's garbage, rumors. It's little pieces of information picked up here and there by liars, by thieves, by the world's worst people. That's who spies are, by the way. That's who we recruit. And we recruit a liar, and then we're shocked when they lie to us. But our job as intelligence officers is to receive this information and sift through it, pick out the bits of truth, build that up through analysis, and produce intelligence that informs decision-making. That's how it's supposed to work. And the intelligence community doing this process was coming back saying, hey, we don't necessarily have the evidence that says Saddam Hussein continues to retain meaningful qualities of weapons of mass destruction. And if that's your reason for going to war, maybe we don't have a reason. So Feith's job was to go back and cherry pick the kernels of garbage and then breathe life into them. And so he did that, and that helped to create the push towards war, et cetera. After the war, though, they didn't find the weapons of mass destruction. And there was a panic. And Rumsfeld sent an Office of Special Projects team to Baghdad. The reason why I know this is that I was interviewing Iraqis for an article I was preparing for Harper's Magazine, and one of the Iraqis who met with me, who I knew when I was a weapons inspector, said, you wouldn't believe what this team is doing. He described the team in detail, who they were, where they were. They were bringing in these Iraqis and saying, the quote was, and I wrote it down, our government is in trouble, meaning the U.S. government. Our president is in trouble. He said there would be weapons of mass destruction, and we can't find any. So we need your help in creating weapons that can be found. And they were talking about if we bring in certain capabilities and then discover them, we can say, here they are, and we need your help doing this. And the guy turned to him, and it was one of the greater compliments. He said, you do know there's people in the world like Scott Ritter, who are the best forensic investigators around. If you try to do this, he'll be able to uncover it instantly and prove you to be a liar. And they didn't have a response to that. But Rumsfeld was even trying to cook the books after the war. That's my point. The man is useless. Useless. I mean, hillbilly armor, wherever, not a single decision he made as Secretary of Defense was in the service of our country.
Why did he get the post? I'll just pass it to you briefly on that, because I wanted to also talk about the airstrikes in advance of the meeting between Biden and the head of Afghanistan. But why did he get the post twice? Why did Donald Rumsfeld? Why was he the youngest Secretary of Defense under Ford? And why did he get it again?
Well, the first time is that Ford was basically at that time under a lot of pressure about Russia, Team B, an alternative approach, et cetera. And Rumsfeld was the perfect liar to come in and shape events, because that's what Rumsfeld does. He lies. He's a professional liar. And so he came in as Secretary of Defense to help shape a world situation vis-a-vis the Soviet Union by promoting the Soviet Union as a greater threat than it actually was. Liar. Why did he come back the second time? Because George W. Bush was an incompetent slug who the establishment decided they needed to surround with professional handlers and liars. Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld. These were the people that were picked by the establishment to handle the most incompetent president we've had, up until perhaps the current one.
And Scott, just to be clear, when they couldn't find evidence, they started torturing people to get those people to try to basically connect Saddam Hussein to 9/11. That was also one of the other things that came out of this. Or am I misremembering this?
Oh, no. The CIA was their whole rendition program and taking these people in. They one of the lines of questioning was establishing a linkage between Al Qaeda and Iraq to justify after the fact the invasion by saying there was a linkage between Saddam and Iraq. So yes, they tortured people to get them to confess to something that never existed. And as I pointed out, they put a team in Iraq whose job was to fabricate WMD that then would be discovered. I mean, this is the U.S. government.
It is villainous. It's almost cartoonishly villainous, except I don't mean to, to trivialize it or make light of it, but it's truly villainous, trying to frame people and then torturing them into saying it's terrible. Briefly, Scott, the fate of Afghanistan as the United States withdraws and it seems that the Taliban is taking over. One quick note or one quick question here. I want to sort of clarify. We had a guest on yesterday we were talking to. I think we've had you on about this topic before once. Our guest yesterday said he doesn't see us completely withdrawing from Afghanistan. He sees the CIA, other parts of the American intel establishment, and the Pentagon playing some role, leaving a flag on the ground or something like that we can come back to continue to exert influence and use them as a weapon against Iran. I've heard from other people that we're withdrawing completely and that we're effectively tail between our legs or whatever. We're heading back home. I'm trying to remind myself. Where do you fall on that? What do you think of the idea that we are going to stick around, or that we're just completely leaving? What's your take there, Scott?
Look, I'm a guy who has a military professional background. The Americans don't stick 650 troops out in the middle of nowhere with no backup, no support, no plan. We just don't operate that way. We have 900 troops in Syria, but they're backed up by thousands of troops in Iraq that provide a logistical lifeline and a quick reaction capability, and they're backed up by air power based out of the Gulf. In Afghanistan, anybody who thinks that we're going to leave 650 troops in Afghanistan in isolation and then leave a couple hundred CIA operatives in isolation without thousands of American troops right there to provide quick reaction force is smoking dope. That may be something that we're telling people, but at the end of the day, there is no quick reaction force. There is no emergency reaction force. We can't support these people. We can't sustain them. They will be withdrawn. We have lost this war. We can't operate in Afghanistan with less than 5,000 people. That's just the reality. That was why that number was so important when Trump was trying to push for the rapid evacuation of American troops. And he had the numbers from 5,000 to 2,500. The Pentagon freaked because they said, we can't sustain 2,500. That's an unsustainable number. We need 5,000 because the way we operate is we don't put people in harm's way without overwhelming firepower being able to be brought in to help them. If we couldn't do it with 2,500, what makes people think we could do it with 650 spread between an embassy isolated in Baghdad and Baghdad International Airport trying to keep it open. Look, the Taliban have won this conflict. We're already ordering the Afghans to withdraw from the rural districts into the populated areas. The same thing that we told the South Vietnamese in February of 1975. And what happens once an army starts retreating, once an army loses faith in its ability to win? Because if you can't prevail in the countryside, you ain't going to hold the city. It's over. It's over.
Scott, before you leave, look, pet interest of my own on regards to the channel. I'm curious if you have a take on the Director of National Intelligence coming out with a UFO report. I guess it's not just them, it's the alphabet soup of agencies in general. Do you have a perspective on it? Do you have a take? Do you have your own interests? How do you take the information that came out in the report? I'm just curious.
I mean, we know that pilots have seen weird things over time. I mean, there's always talks about, when I was in the military, the West Coast Navy pilots, Marine Corps pilots always talked about seeing weird things. Big deal. I will tell you this. I am not somebody who believes that somewhere in Area 51 is a bunker where Fox Mulder and other people are looking at aliens and sifting through stuff and that we're sitting on a big secret. Why? Because America can't keep secrets. We can't keep secrets. We don't know how to keep secrets. There is no great secret out there. If there was, it would have been leaked to the press by now by somebody with a political motive. Releasing this information, putting it out there, I think that, one, it's the kind of transparency that should occur to alleviate any irresponsible speculation. But two, I don't like partial releases, because all it does is fuel speculation.
Yeah.
I think we have a history of seeing things we can't explain, and that's that. I don't think we're sitting on an alien body. I don't think we're sitting on some fantastic new technology that the aliens brought to Earth and we're moving on. That doesn't mean that I don't believe that there's other life forms out there.
Yeah.
I mean, the universe is infinite. Of course, there's other life forms out there, and that doesn't mean that I don't think other life forms may have visited our planet, and maybe there's been some interaction that occurred.
But you're saying our government and it would have leaked if there was some contact, if there was some establishment of communications or some secret knowledge or material technology, whatever you're saying, that it would have leaked by now. Is that right, Scott? We got to close, but is that right?
That's right. America can't keep secrets. We don't keep secrets.
Interesting.
No.
Interesting. I'm gonna think about that. I want to sort of look around because I can see what you're saying, but humans are just gossipy in general.
Right.
but especially since 2016, everything that's been happening, leak after leak after leak after leak after leak. That seems to be characteristic of it. Anyway, Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower. Follow Scott on Twitter @RealScottRitter. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Going into a break, coming back with Guy McPherson talking about climate change and whether our estimates may have been too optimistic. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So a leak came out about the report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Climate Panel report, and it warned about the devastating effect of warming, and it warned that the effects are going to hit far sooner than initial estimates. And keep in mind, these estimates have gotten more and more dire as time has gone on, as, of course, you would imagine, we get closer to that horrible eventuality, and you could kind of reconcile those two things to see the impact of those things. Tens of millions of people were going to be facing hunger by 2050. One of the things, quote, this is a warning of existential risk of survival of collapse, said the climate movement Extinction Rebellion in response to the report. AFP is reporting on this. What is this? France. This is France reporting. The worst is yet to come. Draft UN climate report warns of drastic changes over the next 30 years. To have a conversation about the report, because like I said, this report seemed to be getting worse and worse each year this report is being released. This Guy McPherson. Guy McPherson is an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. He is professor emeritus at the University of Arizona. He has published works more to include a dozen books and 100 of scholarly articles. Dr. McPherson, how's it going today? Thank you for joining us.
It's going great, Jamarl. Thanks very much for having the conversation.
Absolutely. So this report, like I said, it seems to get worse and worse. I remember reading the last report, and if I'm not mistaken, was speaking to you when this report initially came out. Species, I'm just going to read France 24 on this. Species extinction, more widespread disease, unlivable heat, ecosystem collapse, cities menaced by rising seas. These and other devastating climate impacts are accelerating and bound to become painfully obvious before a child born today turns 30. That's dark. That is very dark. Now, you've talked about abrupt climate collapse, and I'm not quite sure the horizon that you were thinking of in regards to the abrupt climate collapse. When you came up with your hypothesis, what was your thought process in regards to how long that was going to take place?
Well, initially, based on the number of self-reinforcing feedback loops we have triggered, and also the aerosol masking effect, sometimes called global dimming, I thought we would be extinct by 2030. So this leaked report from the IPCC comes closer than any of their previous works. But I think we need to go back a little ways. The big news in this report is that it claims that we're already at 1.1 C over the 1750 baseline. Now, this is a huge admission because we go back to October 1990, the final year of the advisory group on greenhouse gases. That was the direct predecessor to the IPCC, and this was just a couple of months before the IPCC came into existence. And the advisory group on greenhouse gases reports that if we go above 1 degree C, above the 1750 baseline, then we will have rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. In other words, we would trigger a bunch of self-reinforcing feedback loops.
Wait, just so people understand what that means. It basically means we are given an estimate of things, that if things go in a proportional way, this is what it looks like. However, the world doesn't work in proportionalities. So things can happen, such as the Arctic melts, in which case you don't have a reflection back from the sun, in which case there's more heat that's added to the ocean. It becomes that, where you have all of these effects that take place in the natural world that creates, let's say, like a feedback in the way that the heat increases and that we can't compensate for. I mean, that's what I'm trying to, did I explain that correctly?
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly right. We're talking about the loss of ice, or at least a great reduction of ice in the Arctic and Antarctic, and the loss of Arctic sea ice is forecast to occur in the very near future. In addition, the Amazon rainforest is swiftly switching to a savanna instead of a forest. There are dozens of these self-reinforcing feedback loops that have already been reported. And again, the IPCC is playing catch-up.
In a very general sense, and this is often one of the pushbacks given by people from the right, even if they buy the narrative that we're undergoing climate change, there's this sense, okay, not just that the world is a big place, but that, you know, this biological, nonlinear, complex system that we're living in, that with, like you're saying, all these weird, unpredictable feedback loops, nevertheless is self-regulating, has been for billions of years. And that we have proved relatively self-regulating too, that we've, whether you view us as a scourge or a blessing, humanity has been able to stick around and survive and expand for years and years and years and years. Why then would you put it as an apocalypse? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why would you put it as an apocalypse or the end of humanity? Because that seems to be the level of language. What makes you think that we wouldn't be able to survive this and that life itself, you know, life springs eternal, that idea that we would be able to, the system would sort of work itself back out. It would dynamically restabilize itself in some new equilibrium, that kind of thing. Guy, why do you not buy that if you don't?
We are human animals, and as such, we require habitat for our species. There's a report that came out in the peer-reviewed literature in Scientific Reports in 2018 indicating that we were on the verge of losing all life on Earth with a 5 or 6 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise above the 1750 baseline. All life on Earth. Think about that for a minute. That surely would include our species as well as the other species on Earth. And
but Guy, that's not really hitting what Shane is talking about. I think the argument that goes against what Shane is talking about, because Shane's point is, look, humanity is resilient, and we are brilliant species, especially when we get to the point of wrapping our head around an issue and going after it. Why wouldn't it change in this situation? Or for that matter, why wouldn't the globe?
Yeah, why wouldn't the globe? Why wouldn't all the ecological systems?
I think the argument here, though, is human beings are biological animals, and we know crackheads exist. We know heroin overdoses exist. Meaning we know that the human species doesn't necessarily always work itself out, meaning the biological animal doesn't always make rational choices that works itself out. And that's just within an individual. We're talking, what does it look like for a planet and a global species where this stuff is a habitable space? You have humanity as a whole, and humanity needs to do something in order to fix it. And yet humanity doesn't either ascertain it to be a problem, has all of these incentives and drives pushing it in a particular direction, just like a heroin addict. A heroin addict can overdose. Humanity can overdose. The planet can overdose.
But we have done so before, and I guess that's where I'm a little bit more skeptical. And admittedly, this is much more globalized.
But there is no such thing as a person who overdose dies, and that's it. I mean, I'm making a point that we know, just as a flat fact, that a biological animal can take choices that are not in its best interest because of the incentives that are pushed, in this case, the kind of brain chemical.
Totally. And I'm not making the rational argument thing. I'm not saying that people are reasonable, therefore we will work things out tautologically. I'm saying that people are adaptive, and that if you look at the Arabian Peninsula, or you look at the Saharan Desert, these are both areas, as far as I can tell, that used to be widely forested. And then through a combination of anthropogenic causes, human-caused phenomena, and larger geological phenomena, ice ages, these kinds of things, through this mishmash of factors, these ecologies change dramatically. And the Fertile Crescent, while it is still fertile, what once used to be a sort of breadbasket of not just the region, but of the sort of wider world in that wider region, has gotten much more desertified. It's become a big problem, and this is over the course of millennia. Yet we still live there. You still are able to sustain life. And I would have thought, maybe back then, apocalyptically, okay, our habitat is gone, where will we go now? But we still reasserted ourselves. Even if it goes up 6-7 degrees, maybe we can come back to the life thing. All life getting knocked out? Where's this, any links, any science? What are you backing that up with, Guy?
It's all about the rate of change. As a conservation biologist, one of the things I study is the rate of change. It's not the level, it's not the temperature level we will reach. Of course, life persisted through all kinds of temperature changes in the past, from ice age to a superheated Earth, 23 degrees Celsius, in fact. But the rate of change dictates whether or not we're in the midst of a mass extinction event, and we are, and we have been for more than a decade. It's all about the rate of change, and if the environment changes faster than we can keep up, and by keep up I mean also producing offspring, then we're done.
And so what you're saying is it is too fast of a shock. The heat rise, even though it's decades, it's centuries if you include the Industrial Revolution, on a geological timescale, on a tectonic timescale, that's the briefest moment in time. What you're saying is Earth has not had to adapt this quickly before, therefore it won't. Is that basically the point, Guy?
Yes, and let's look at the 8 previous species in the genus Homo that went extinct. I'm guessing that a few of the last members of each of those species said, we can adapt. We're really clever. We've been through things like this before. But they all went extinct.
But we drove them out. Homo sapiens, as far as I can tell, we drove out the Neanderthals. We drove out these other Homo variants.
Well, see,
it's a different situation.
I guess for me, the point that I tried to make before it's like we know that a species can take certain actions where they can't recover from. Meaning, a heroin addict, yes, their arms can get different, their bodies can get different. It's like, okay, that guy can still perpetuate himself. But we do know at a certain point that guy dies. Humanity can't necessarily live in nuclear wastelands because, the planet itself. And I got to be honest, I don't care about fruit flies. I care about us. Like, what does humanity do in this situation? But, Guy, thank you for joining us, man. 2030. I am holding you to that, guy. Both of us are. We're putting that on the calendar.
If we're still there, if we're still all there, maybe you owe us a beer or something, guy. Yeah. I don't want to hold you to it, but
the voice that you guys have been listening to is Guy McPherson. He's an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. He's professor emeritus at the University of Arizona. His published works include more than a dozen books and hundreds of scholarly articles. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning, one of the last hours this week. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And that means covering news, politics, events, and more. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, once again, hope everybody's having a great morning. Hope you're doing well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were about 775 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 287 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 11,466 cases per day. That's a decrease of 10% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 47% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 54% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 33,632,000 people across the United States and killed 604,356 people across the U.S. The World Health Organization has warned there would be another wave of COVID across Europe unless countries began to take rigorous precautions to prevent it. This warning comes as cases are rising again on the continent after more than 2 months of decline. I think it was over 10 weeks of decline, averaged out across the countries. Over in Southeast Asia, Indonesia is imposing coronavirus lockdowns starting this Saturday in order to try to curtail COVID. COVID is affecting Indonesia more than any other country in the region. And Thailand's prime minister said the reopening of the holiday island Phuket to foreigners is a risk, but one his citizens need to accept. Starting today, foreign travelers will be able to travel to the island without quarantining for the first time in 16 months. Prayut Chan-o-cha, that's Thailand's prime minister, is using Phuket as a sandbox for other tourist sites in the country. Due to the fact that it's an island, Phuket serves as a useful experiment with reopening for tourism. In national news, back here in the States, charges were filed. The Trump Organization and the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, have both been indicted. Again, like Jamarl said, this is 100% a hit against Donald Trump. District Attorney Cyrus R. Vance Jr. is behind this. He made a name for himself politically by first, declaring that he'd go after Trump. I think last year that was a big move by him over the last couple of years. And we're going to see where this goes. We're going to be talking with Ted Rall about that a little bit later this hour. In our next headline, other big things going on. Donald Rumsfeld has died at the age of 88. He served twice as Secretary of Defense, once under Gerald Ford, once again under George W. Bush. We had a great conversation with Scott Ritter in the last half hour about this from 8:15 to 8:45 a.m. Eastern. Go back and check it out. He had communicated with Donald Rumsfeld. You can go back and listen to it, but Donald Rumsfeld sort of tried to use him as a tool against the Democrats while Scott was doing his whistleblowing as a WMD whistleblower in the lead up to the Iraq War. And Donald Rumsfeld thought he could use Scott. It seems like that didn't turn out very well. Instead, maybe he did successfully use him because Scott got involved in writing this report, being involved in this commission. Ultimately, didn't go how he wanted it to, more how Donald Rumsfeld wanted it to. Anyway, he has passed away, and we've been kind of scrutinizing him and criticizing him as you do with public figures when they pass away. More so than when they're still alive, and that's part of why these are events. You know.
You said he had a beautiful soul, Shane.
I did not say.
I'm joking.
I did not say that. I did not say that. I did not say that. But I don't. This is the thing, man. Where you go when you put somebody on the defensive, staying on the offensive.
I'm teasing.
You're a monster, Jamarl. That's what I need to respond with. I need to escalate or something like that because it's usually you're kind of in a supine position once you're defending yourself. Anyway. The judge in the Britney Spears case has denied her request to be removed from a conservatorship, which was managed by her father, which she and her fans, at least some of them, say has been used in abusive and traumatizing ways against her. Britney Spears, of course, big pop star icon, back in 2008, had a very high-profile mental breakdown, and was put in this conservatorship, basically a sort of legal agreement for managing somebody who is no longer mentally competent in these various ways. Doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means they're unstable, like Britney Spears was, very arguably and even clearly. At the same time, however, I'll put it like this, just briefly, and I kind of want to come back to this after we close headlines here. This is the thing about it. It's not like she is living in her basement, unable to function, stuck. She is, as far as I can tell, a functioning pop star who works a lot, makes a bunch of money, and is competent at doing the thing that she does. Everybody knows that she's had some problems, but everybody, I think, is a little bit empathetic with her because she had a weird and kind of screwed up upbringing, an overbearing father, and all this stuff. My point is, she's she seems competent. In other words, why is the judge still claiming? What am I not seeing? Has she like recently threatened suicide? Is it that she's like threatened people in her close life? What is the claim? Why is she still in this?
Saying she still needs to be under the authority of somebody else.
It's 13 years at this point. It's well over a decade. Why is the harness still on her? Why is she benefiting all these other people who get to control what she does? You get
I have
it.
no idea. I mean, it's very weird. That's all. It's like, because it puts you into two frames of mind. Okay, is she a threat to herself and a threat to somebody else? If that is a no, okay. Does she not know how to function as a person? And it's that kind of,
Does she have a right to make decisions for herself?
Does she have a right to make decisions for herself? Does she pass that default bar of being a person that she can do this? And the judge is basically saying no. Okay, why?
Yes.
Like what is it? What do you use? Like there has to be something there that I'm not seeing, and maybe it's just very weird. That
seems to be the kind of it's very
weird.
Yeah, I really don't like this.
I don't like this at all.
It's
because it's
the legal
thing.
thing.
Being a person.
Yeah, it's like legal personhood in your rights.
Anybody is like, well, how would you feel if somebody else was making decisions for you?
It's not just the mental health awareness stuff, and it's not that I'm a big fan of Britney Spears, although I do like the song Toxic. I've heard some good covers of Toxic. It's not like I listened to her back in the day, but it's the legal aspect of it. And yes, mental health awareness, that stuff too, but it's like, wait. This is legal in government?
I think it's like you empathize, and even when you're looking at this person, you say, okay, what if that was me? Like there's this thing where people, like lawyers or doctors would say, okay, yes, this doctor made a mistake, but man, if that was me, I don't want anybody coming on me. So, I'm not gonna testify with that. It's that stuff. Like I can recognize, or reporters. It's like, okay, this happened to this reporter. Hey, we need to fight for the reporters because they're attacking this reporter. Like anything it is, like they holler. It's as a person, as a human being, you get it on some level that I don't want that other person making decisions for me.
First they came for Miley Cyrus, then they came for Britney Spears, and then they're going to come for us next tomorrow.
I mean, I'm saying this as somebody, look, I've been in situations where I felt like I was being the medical stuff, where it's like somebody is saying you're lying. Somebody's saying you're saying something that's not true. You're being adversely affected because of it. And it's like you take that to this next level of not just in the medical sphere, but as a person, just as existing and how I want to exist. And that is being challenged, where as a legal authority is saying, you're no longer allowed to be a person to make decisions for yourself for some reason. The reason seems absent. What you do see is Britney, who at this point, everybody and their mama knows, even if you don't necessarily listen to her albums, and she comes across saying, I want to be a person. I want to be allowed to make decisions for myself. I want to have a baby. Like, it's this stuff. It's like they're forcing me to work. They're forcing me to do this. They're sticking me with drugs. it's really heady when you think about it.
It is. I want to come back to this, but I also want to close briefly. What's weird to me is that, and I admit this is completely inappropriate, but I feel more loathing towards Britney Spears' dad than I do towards Don Rumsfeld.
Isn't it weird?
It's like that's what's, and I'm pretty sure most people are on that page too, despite the one being an apparently screwed up dude, the other being a war criminal. It's like
very heady.
Those shouldn't balance out that way.
The war criminal is so heavy that it feels like it's so untouchable.
You can't. It's ineffable or something like that.
But the dad, you can touch the dad. The dad is clear.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Oh no. No. That's not a good thing to do. Anyway, a couple more headlines here. Bill Cosby was released from prison yesterday. This has to do with him basically being denied the right to use his Fifth Amendment right to not speak about something that incriminates him. Basically has to do with the lawyers refusing to prosecute him in one case so they could then call him as a witness in another case that he wouldn't be able to use the Fifth Amendment in anyway. This was apparently broke protocol. You can kind of sense from it. I'm not a lawyer, but you can kind of sense, okay, there's something screwy going on there. Anyway, that was what allowed Bill Cosby to be put in prison. Since that's not right, they have now freed him from prison. In other words, procedurally, the way they went about prosecuting him was apparently not justified. Now he's been set free, and we'll see what happens. Screwed up situation. Jamarl and I we had a good conversation in our first opening headline segment for the show. One more headline here. In international news, Chinese President Xi Jinping has warned that foreign powers will have their heads bashed if they try to bully China, saying that the Chinese people have created their own world. Jinping said these words during the huge centenary celebrations of the forming of the Chinese Communist Party. Jinping also repeated a long-standing Chinese promise to integrate Taiwan, reintegrate, some would say. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You got where I was going with the Rumsfeld Spears father thing. Jamie Spears, I think is his name, whatever it is. Like, more people have probably heard of that whole situation that Brittany was denied that request and has heard about the Rumsfeld thing. And I get it. We criticizing mass culture, pop culture, whatever. But I think fundamentally the point is it is the media that chooses to prop some of these things up. It's a little bit screwed, and it's just worth noticing occasionally. Exactly.
But I think it's a human thing on a human level too. It's like Khashoggi versus the Yemen War. Yeah. Like, it's like everywhere you went, everybody and their mom, but this was during when my wife and I were traveling. Khashoggi was on the television screen. You could be in a European country, Khashoggi. You're in Africa, Khashoggi. It's like you couldn't get away from it. Like, it was just there, ever present. Yeah. Despite the fact that Saudi Arabia had been prosecuting a vicious, bloody war in Yemen, that had been starving, had been weaponizing disease, all of that stuff. Yep. Nobody cared. Yeah. Khashoggi everywhere.
Single dude gets dismembered.
Yeah, he's dismembered. And it's like, oh, his woman who he wanted to marry. Like, it's like almost like a love story. So he knows he's in danger, but he loves her so much. And he wants to get married that he goes to the embassy. Brave man goes to the embassy and faces down the Saudis who dismembered his body as that type of stuff. It's this notion of the connection between a human versus something that is so large you can't touch. A war criminal is difficult to touch.
But there's still ways to humanize, and I don't know that you want to, and this is probably part of the problem, but there's still ways to bring that down to our understanding.
But you should humanize a war criminal. Well, because it should make it very clear that this is a person. This is not an icon. This is not something that is untouchable. No, this guy got up every morning. He ate his breakfast. He pet his dog. He had sex with his wife every so often. All of these things just like a person. He cheated on something. He was a person in every other capacity. However, in the capacity of his job that he thought, he made choices that got a lot of people killed. He probably never even saw those people. It was so distant and remote. It was just choices. There's something that is vitally important to humanize that. Vitally important. Because people sleepwalk into it. Donald Rumsfeld didn't get up and say, I'm going to be Donald Rumsfeld. He became that with one choice after the next that was presented to him that he made, based on thoughts, ideologies, and everything else that made him propagate the way he propagated. But I guess the point I'm making is I don't want him to be this thing that recedes in the history, anything more than I want Martin Luther King to recede in the history. I want history to be a living, breathing thing where you put these things in humanistic terms where it's like that was a person and that person made horrible choices. That's what I want. Because to your credit, you're right. This notion of the soul and everything else, can't touch that. What it can touch is, why did he make the choices that he made? And how do we want people to propagate? And do we want those people to make those same choices, or even have those choices be made available to them for them to make in the first place? That's a vital thing. I hope that makes sense. And yes, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on it because I think it's important. When you look at Martin Luther King and you think about him, how do you think about him? Well, how did he think about himself? And did he think about himself in that way, or was he just a person making choices that was presented to him? He was a person making choices. And when you think, for example, there was a speech where he made this point of saying, this kid was like, like said something to him where he felt like, how dare he? And it's like he felt this way where he's sitting, he's thinking about it, he's mulling over it like this, that little bee, you know, how dare he? I'm Martin Luther King, I'm here doing this. And he thought to himself, he says, yeah, but doesn't that kid have a point? But the fact that Martin Luther King is annoyed by this kid that says something, that's a humanizing thing. That's a person who's saying, how dare that kid, you know, hurl this insult at me.
my authority, whatever.
Yeah, but it's this notion that he thought, like, you take him out of this realm of an icon the moment that you realize that King was a person just like everybody else and got annoyed just like everybody else, and this kid had every right to. It's that. I don't want Donald Rumsfeld and anybody else to recede in the history in that way, in that context. I want those people to be human beings where we understand that those people made choices as human beings.
And we came back to Rumsfeld. One more thing on this.
But we should talk Brittany, right?
Well, no, but there's something that came up. It was just a little bit too nerdy for me to be like, I'm going to insert this. Yeah. Because it's like a reference. Ender's Game. You ever read Ender's Game?
Yes. The movie. I've seen the movie.
Okay, the movie's not nearly as good as the book.
Right.
Based on the book.
People keep telling me the book much better.
Book's much better. I love the book. Great book. A little bit controversial in some ways. The book has two offshoots, goes in two different directions in terms of the series. I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, there is a bit there where one of the offshoots of the series, first book is called Speaker for the Dead, Speaker of the Dead. There's this idea in this society, and again, sci-fi, I'm not trying to say anything, I'm just saying it's an interesting idea.
Because it was a genocide, basically.
Well, yes, but there's this genocide of the buggers, but there's this other thing where basically there's a role, there's a career basically where you are a speaker for the dead. In other words, instead of coming in to give a funeral service, your job is you research the person meticulously, you try to get into their mind, and then to honor them or to at least do the thing that we're talking about, to enshrine who they were into history so that they're sort of legible as a figure for people to judge and admire and all these things. Speaker for the Dead comes in after they die and is like, this is the person's life. Yeah. And they say the good things, they say the bad things, they say it all together. And whatever feelings you get from hearing this, you're going to, you know, it's going to be how you feel about that person, but at least you've heard it all. You've heard everything said. You've heard the truth about them, whatever it is. And that's the most important thing that you can hear about somebody. If you want to know them and really understand them and appreciate them, you need to know the truth. You need to accept them in some sense for what they are, not just who they are, but where they came from, all that stuff. I wish we had more of that kind of thing. As it is, whether it's high-level condemnation or admiration or just the media not moving, I feel like we're all due something like that. I feel like human beings are due, when we pass, this kind of understanding, even the worst of us. Because if we have value, if human beings have inherent value, if life has inherent value, don't we recognize that for each person by doing that kind of thing, by summing them up, and not merely judging them, judging them, but also like, this is who they were. We understand them to the best that we can. This is who they were, that kind of thing. Does that make sense, Jamarl?
It does make sense. And yes, I think I agree with you. I think the problem becomes, what do you sum up of them, if that makes sense? And within the context of trying to sum up a person's life, what comes up? Like, do you talk about their wife? Do you talk about how they help with their mom? Do you talk about how they beat their kids? Like, what part comes up is relevant enough to get across the flavor of the person's life? Yeah. That's a difficult thing when you think about it. Like, it's one thing if you say, okay, we have the capacity to take a chip out of the person's head, or we can say this quantity of that individual is this quantity of that individual, and you take it how you take it based on who you are and how you absorb it. That's one thing. But we don't get that. We get something else. And it's like, what part of that do you absorb to give you, okay, here's the flavor of the individual that they have, and I hate that flavor of the individual based on how I articulate my world. I don't hate that idea. Love that idea on some level. And you can make a case on some level. They do that when they write books about the people. Yeah. And people who care enough about it can engage themselves and engross themselves in it. Like the guy who wrote the book on Stalin, Koblitz, or whatever the guy's name is. Like that. He hates Stalin, and yet respects him on some level because he wrote the books on him. I think he wrote like 3 volumes on Stalin. And so it's like, even when you're like...
Stephen Kotkin, I think
that's it, right. Doesn't like Stalin at all. He has a clear ideology about the world. And yet he wrote the book. Mm-hmm. And the book wasn't there to condemn. The book wasn't there to wag a fist at least in the way that... I read one of those. I read the one in the context leading up to when Hitler, where it was like both of these guys were rising to power, and Stalin was looking over, was like, whoa, hey, pay attention to that guy. That guy's a problem. Yeah. Like, because he could see Hitler rising, right? The rest of the world. It was that one. But I guess the point I'm making here is they do that on some level. It's just not done, I guess, in this way where you can have any and everybody just easily accessible. And it's kind of grand, it doesn't make sense. Like, you may have somebody at the funeral that would talk about it, but they only talk about the good things. And I'm sitting there like, This guy was a miserable, horrible person. What are you talking about? But they do that maybe for world leaders. At some point, maybe they can take a chip out of a person and say, bam, here's the quantity of the individual that you can absorb to the degree you want to absorb. That's not what we have right now. We just have books.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's close it.
Yeah.
We're going into Ted Rall coming back, talking about charges filed against the Trump Organization, CFO Alan Weisselberg turning himself in effectively immediately. We'll be getting into how much this actually hits Trump, what the charges are, how this is being treated in New York and New York City with our next guest, Ted Rall. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, going into our break, coming back with Ted on the other side. Be right back.
Yeah.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us to have a conversation about what is taking place with the Trump Organization. And I'll just bring Ted in first. We have Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rall and read his cartoons and articles at rawl.com. So the Trump Organization, Donald Trump may be in a little bit of trouble, but right now we're talking about the Trump Organization. The chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, has surrendered to Manhattan prosecutors early Thursday to face tax-related charges. Now, the CFO, or Donald Trump in this case, Weisselberg, he's expected to appear in court this afternoon with representatives of the Trump Organization. Now, it's not clear what charges he's or the organization would face. And an indictment is expected today to be unsealed, or expected to be unsealed later today. Ted, this does not look good for Trump. Now, and I know I say we're talking about Weisselberg, but the catch is they're putting pressure on Weisselberg to get to Trump, meaning whatever they're doing here, in the case of this bringing indictment or bringing charges against Weisselberg and against Trump or Trump Organization, I don't think it's an end in and of itself. Yes, it's embarrassing to Trump. Yes, it's somewhat rough when you're looking at it. It's like, whoa, those guys were committing crimes. But more importantly, it's Trump's name, Trump Organization, first point. And on second point, Weisselberg is the guy who has been working with Trump for God knows how long. It has been dealing with Trump for God knows how long. Is Trump's money man for all sorts. And if you want to know where the bones are, you talk to the guy that basically got rid of the bones for you. Meaning Weisselberg is the guy that they're trying to bend into shape and into form to get, in my assessment, Trump. And what are your thoughts on that? Am I being too conspiratorial on this? And when I say they, I don't necessarily mean that there's this kind of group of people coming together in this kind of club and saying, okay, we're going to put our fingers together against Trump. I don't think it's that. I think it's Donald Trump put his head up. Democrats are terrified, especially third-way Democrats, and those are in this kind of Clinton, Obama, this classic version of the party, regardless of whether they're working in the DA or whether they're working in government. And in this very specific case, they think Donald Trump may run again. That's a problem. And not just the problem, we need to solve that problem. Now, did Donald Trump commit crimes? That could be true. But is it also politically motivated? That is also true. Both things can be true. And that is unfortunate for Donald Trump, especially in the context of Weisenberg basically being indicted. Now, is there anything that I said that you disagree with? And definitely add on to it if there's something that I'm missing.
I don't disagree with a single word you said. They're clearly not after Weisselberg. They want to flip him and get him to testify against Trump. And one of the signals I was looking for was whether or not Weisselberg would be subjected to the classic New York City perp walk, which is usually used in order to humiliate suspects and is a sign of contempt. It's a signal that the prosecutors hate you and want to humiliate you. Right. And if you get to come in through,
well, that's the classic thing of like, it's like, are we taking him out the back? No, we're taking him out the front, Bob. And just take the guy out front. Yeah, law and order.
Exactly. And so Weisselberg was spared the perp walk at 6:20 this morning and was ushered into the office via the freight entrance in order to bypass the waiting media frenzy. And the fact that he got to do that, and it's all going to be processed and then later unsealed later today, the actual charges, they're not going to be read to him in court, means that the DA's office is signaling to Weisselberg and his attorneys, listen, we're not after your client. We're after a much bigger fish, number 45. So we don't want to hurt your guy. We're just leaning on him. And so, of course, the question is there, I've been trying to turn this over in my mind, is there any inducement for Weisselberg? Is there anything that Trump could offer him, possibly, to cause him not to do that other than just psychological loyalty to a man he's worked for nearly half a century?
And is that enough? That's the big question. Well, but I think for some people it might be.
For some people it might be. Is it for Weisselberg?
We'll see.
And can Trump bet his life on it? Because Trump is betting his life on whatever that tangible, intangible thing is. Whew, that's rough.
It might be enough for me. I mean, we certainly have seen, for example,
20 years, Ted.
We've seen people.
20 years. 20 years of hard labor. 20 years of hard labor. You're in a room. It's three of the guys. There's this light above that's just kind of going in. There's a dark space, and somebody's like banging on the table, and it's like, Ted, 20 years for your loyalties to Trump.
You worked for this man, and what did you get for it?
Right. What did you get for it?
It led you to this room, and
look at what happened to Cohen. Cohen came to Jesus. Michael Cohen came to Jesus. So it's like
Cohen was thrown under the bus.
Well, that too. That too. But that's the point. Would Trump throw Weisselberg under the bus if it meant saving Trump's life? Trump would do it in a heartbeat. And does Weisselberg know that? It's that.
But Trump's not in a position to save Weisselberg. And he was in a position to save Cohen.
But that's my point, Ted. That's my point. Is Cohen basically Weisselberg? And does Weisselberg know that?
I think it's all the difference in the world. I mean, if someone can save you and chooses not to reach over the side of the life draft to pull you on board, that's very different than the idea that they're not in the life draft in the first place and they can't do it. So I think it's all.
Okay, but here's another side of the loyalty conversation. Isn't the whole point of this investigation, these charges, we'll see what gets unsealed later today, but isn't it that there were these benefits that Trump was giving to people, including Weisselberg? In other words, if the whole point is that Weisselberg was being benefited by Trump,
it implicates by definition almost.
Yeah, but is he really going to turn on him? If the claim is that Weisselberg has been given all these gifts, he's been Trump's pet pony or whatever, and it's, all these tax-free benefits that Trump's decided to give him, isn't that evidence that he's going to be loyal for him? I think you get where I'm coming from, Ted. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I just want to be clear for the listeners that the DA's office is not interested in this particular issue of the benefits that were allegedly not paid taxes upon. That's not what they're after Trump for, right? They're after him for business fraud and for generalized tax evasion. These charges are just about Weisselberg.
It's just to apply pressure, basically. That kind of thing.
So, in terms of, I don't think there is any evidence that we know one way or the other as to whether he will be impervious to this kind of prosecutorial pressure. I mean, the guy might say to himself, I'm 73 years old. I've had a rich life and I have integrity. And part of my integrity is that I'm not a rat. So screw you. I'm going to go to jail. And who knows, my guy might be president again in 3 years and he could give me a pardon. Well, actually, he couldn't give him a pardon, right? Because these are New York State charges. But the point is, he might just figure, I'm going to fall on my sword. I think this comes down to his relationship with Trump and his integrity based on that relationship.
Okay, and here's another angle on this. And we're also going to be talking Ted. We may go to a break in the meantime, or we may just transition straight into it, also talking about lagging support for Biden, as a lot of people are sort of backing away from it. But one more point on this. Another way of looking at this, since I'm going to quote here from an article about this. Quote, speaking about Weisselberg, quote, they could not get him to cooperate because he would not say that Donald Trump had knowledge or any information that he may have been not deducting properly the use of cars or an apartment, end quote. That is an attorney, to be clear, that's an attorney for the Trumps speaking, but basically saying Trump didn't know about any of this alleged stuff that Weisselberg is being charged for. Is this a pressure campaign, or are they trying to actually prosecute Weisselberg to sort of send the Trump organization into disarray? It's all speculation. I don't want to just, live on speculation or whatever, but maybe there's another angle to this is my point. Maybe they're trying to gut the Trump organization, gut this close loyalist of Trump's so that Trump is thrown a bit more into disarray, that kind of thing. Do you think it's that strategic, or what? How do you see this, Ted?
I think that when prosecutors engage in these kind of tactics, they always have a plan A, B, C, D, and they think, well, okay, we don't know what the guy will do, and if we have to try him and he won't flip, we'll try him, and that'll have its effect. But that's clearly not Plan A. I mean, yeah. Plan A, they're after the former president.
There we go.
If it was me, and my thought was, I can't stand this man. I am in a position of authority, and I can use that position to go after him. And Letitia James, again, we're both on board. And the question becomes, all right, did he commit a crime? Yes or no? That's what they ask. And when the answer becomes yes, then they say, all right, it is our job to go after this man. We are going to do this. This is our constitutional obligation. Now, is there something in them that says, yes? Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
For the national audience. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Whether it's Letitia James or Cyrus or Vance Jr. or whatever.
Either one, right. And is it going to give them this notion of, yes, we're incentivized because we're going to get some cred out of it. We're incentivized because we're Democrats. We're incentivized because we think this is great for America. We're incentivized because they hate this man's gut. All of those things are on the table. And those guys in that moment are endowed with all of this, I don't know, what do you want to call it? But oomph is an understatement. And so they say, we think he committed a crime, and we need evidence on that crime. And, okay, so they paid off hush money. Okay, let's start there. That's great. Republicans did this when they tried to work their way up to Bill Clinton. I mean, if you think of the original Whitewater, I think it was called, investigation, had nothing to do with where it ended up. It just this kind of slow crawl. And they got their hands on the guy just before Trump. And they're squeezing him as hard as they possibly can to get that man to squeak. And they're going to throw everything that they possibly can in regards to charges on the table. There's going to be threats and everything else. And the catch becomes 30 years or talk, 25 years or talk. Hey, maybe you can just walk out of this without anything. Maybe these charges disappear if you talk over the president. It becomes that. And I have to be honest, if your name is Donald Trump, I would not put this notion of loyalty when it doesn't seem that you have that much towards, your own people, as being the thing that keeps you out of prison. I think he would have to be insane to be not concerned by this. And I would go so far as to say, on some level, Donald Trump deciding that he's potentially going to run again inspires that much more oomph in this prosecution.
It does, but what if it's all BS and this is just another witch hunt? That's another thing. What if it's...
the thing is, based on New York, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Ted, it is normal for these guys that cheat in regards to the way that they're trying to get Trump, in regards to New York. Meaning, it's so normal that the fact that when you want to go look for a crime, you can find the crime. It's not that it's not criminal. It's that it's selective prosecution. That's the issue. I don't doubt that Trump committed a crime. I'm just more inclined to believe that that's somewhat of a normal crime that Trump committed. And these guys are being selective about the way they go about choosing who they go after. Does it make sense? It's not that he's not guilty. He's probably guilty. It's more so that many of these guys, if not all of them, are guilty of something similar in New York. Ted, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, well, it's kind of the analogy of the police officer, trying to catch people for speeding. He doesn't pull everyone over, and he may not even pull over the fastest person on the road. But he chooses who to pull over, right? And that's totally right. I mean, I think if you wanted to find illegality in just about anybody's lives, you would find something. And if you were to, certainly that's, goes quadruple for people who are in business. And it goes many, many hundreds of times bigger when you're talking about real estate developers. I mean, that's bending the rules, doing shenanigans, creative accounting. I mean, you're talking about a line of business where they're literally allowed to take depreciation on real estate as it goes up in value. It's kind of illegality. It's kind of built into the system and made legal. So there's no way that even if Donald Trump, if this makes any sense, he told his accountants, play it straight. The Democrats at the IRS are out to get me. Be conservative to a fault. Don't take any deductions that we're not 1,000% entitled to. Even if he had those instructions to his people, a smart prosecutor will find something to go after him on.
I'm going to pivot here. I mean, I guess closing comments on this. It seems we're all in agreement that it's politicized. We don't truly know whether or not the Trump organization is guilty of crimes, but it's reasonable to suspect that they are. And yet, this is a political prosecution. And I'm not sure how much the Trump audience or any potential, electorate is actually going to be swayed by this, because it would just seem like a continuation, as it does to us, of year after year after year after year of political bias, political persecution, that kind of thing, political prosecution and persecution, arguably. Anyway, Ted, I wanted to pivot here to talk about Biden, whose polling has gone down. Jamarl, this is a story you brought to me yesterday. I thought this one was pretty interesting. Basically, he's not doing all that much. He's made a bunch of big promises, and now people are kind of disappointed that he's not really doing what he said he would.
Is that it? Failed expectations. The expectations were so high. So this is Reuters. A June 11th to 17th national poll opinion shows Biden is more popular than his Republican predecessor, Donald Trump, ever was. 55% of adults approve of Biden's performance in office, 65% like his responses to the coronavirus pandemic. At this point, 4 years ago, about 36% approved of Donald Trump's performance. So that gives you a gap, right? So there's that. However, a growing number of adults disapprove of Biden's leadership on the economy, gun violence, taxation, with the biggest decline coming from Biden's Democratic Party, especially those under the age of 40, non-white Democrats, or those who don't have a college degree. Now, if you remember, this is Democratic base, right? And if you remember, blacks, Hispanics were also the group that went to Donald Trump in spades. In fact, Biden would have taken Texas if he would have gotten a Hispanic vote in the way that Sanders got a Hispanic vote. Now, I pin a lot of this, personally, on this idea of we expected you to do X, and you told us you were going to do X, and you got in office and you were a puff of smoke. Oh, Joe Biden, agree with the PRO Act so much. And if they put it on my desk, I'd sign it. But I am not willing to do anything beyond just say, if they put it on my desk, Unions built America. He would do stuff like that. And it's so maddening to me. It makes me angry every time I see him do stuff like that, because it's like you're posturing for the camera. And it's like you're posturing. You're in the role of president of the United States. And you act as if it's the weakest perspective in the world. And so, yeah, I would imagine if I'm starting to think of it that way, if my mom is starting to think of it that way, if my wife is still like, where's my check, Joe Biden? Where's my check, Joe Biden? There's a certain thing of like, dude, 600,000 people died, and it seems like you're back to politics as normal. And this group that are starting to disapprove, people under the age of 40, non-white Democrats, those are the people who wanted him to actually do the most. And yeah, I would imagine if they wanted him to do the most, even in the modest agenda that he talked about, that doesn't even seem to be on the table. Yeah, I would imagine they are disillusioned and in such losing faith. What are your thoughts, Ted?
If only we had been able to predict that something like this.
And by the way, gun violence is the big one to me. Like, because to me, that's the one where it's like, all right, dude, defund the police. And then Jen Psaki gets into the fight where Jen Psaki is like, well, it's Republicans that wanted to defund the police. It's like, okay, stop. It's like, okay, just stop. What are your thoughts on this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, by the way, if you guys, I'm sure you guys have probably seen it, but if you haven't, definitely check it out. Yesterday, there was an amazingly interesting, very granular Pew Research analysis of the election results, and they basically found that the group that really elected Joe Biden was a bunch of old white guys.
Yes.
And also it is shocking the extent to which the Democratic Party and Joe Biden lost Latinx support in that race. I mean, considering Trump's long history of nativist rhetoric and the border stuff that should have all counted against him.
Wait. But here's the thing, Ted. This has been portrayed since the election happened, as far as I can tell, as old white guys largely swinging it for Trump. But you're saying they swung it for Biden. It's the exact opposite. Where's the intersectional narrative on this? Why are Latinx voters suddenly either abstaining? Why are they switching to Trump? I'm not really saying that's happening in high numbers, but, to some extent. Specifically, I'm using the phrase Latinx.
Believe it or not, it was.
Well, with the Latina or Latino, with the Latinx population in general, the Latina population, I guess I'm talking about the...
You made it way too complicated.
I get it.
Hispanic population.
But that's the thing. The Latinx thing, the woke-tivists on this one. It's true. Anyway, that's a tangent, Ted. But the narrative on this is completely wrong. Why aren't we hearing about this? Do you think we will?
I think someone's going to have to do a deep dive after the Pew thing. Maybe Pew themselves will do it. It's, of course, obviously, the Latinx population is extremely diverse, and there's going to be a myriad of reasons and motivations there beyond, like, hey, many of them are Catholic, and Catholics are conservatives, and conservatives vote for Republicans. There's more. There's got to be more to it than that. I'm very interested in knowing why. But, it's not surprising at all that at this point, Biden is staring down the barrel of the midterms with not a lot to show in the "what have you done for us lately" category. And I don't see that changing in the next year and a half. There's no reason or motivation for the Republicans to come on board beyond the extent that they have already with infrastructure. They're not going to give him anything else. And, but look, Biden only agreed very reluctantly to, for example, pretend to support the public option. And then, of course, obviously his heart was never in it. And, at the first opportunity to kick it under the bed next to the dust bunnies, he did. And so, we can't possibly be surprised by any of this. But also adding to the fun, I don't know if you guys saw the Politico piece about the dysfunction inside the Kamala Harris office, about her staffers are just sort of like they hate the whole situation there, kind of like Amy Klobuchar's staffers.
Do they? Let me pull that up. Okay, yeah, explain.
It's very out of control. So basically, they're saying there's wild dysfunction within the Veep's office. The chief of staff is apparently sort of a toxic personality who's very cruel to her staffers.
Not a healthy environment. Kamala Harris's office rife with dissent. Politico.
That's the title of the article.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth a read because, and I think it matters more. Simone Sanders says, that this is kind of it's an inside baseball thing. I disagree. It would be if not for the fact that Kamala Harris isn't an ordinary VP. She's the president in waiting.
Wait, when you say this is an inside baseball thing, are you talking about just the unrest inside her staff, that kind of thing?
Yes. In other words, it could be like a Beltway story. And
Yeah. But what you're saying is, if she's setting herself up for president, she wouldn't have her own administration to speak of or something like that. If she were going with her current staff, using this as a track record, it's not a good look. She's not showing that she can do it. She shows that she doesn't have the backing internally. She shows that she can't maintain the cohesion. All those things come to mind. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Ted?
Yeah, and I'm saying that voters are paying more attention to this sort of thing with her than they would with another vice president.
Yeah.
Or more accurately, with a different president.
I get the feeling that Harris is putting the cart before the horse, that she wants the office without the capacity to realize that getting the office requires leadership and other components to get you to the point of being able to use and utilize the office. It's kind of like saying, I want to be a chess champion, but no, I don't want to read the books. Or I want to be a chess champion, but I don't want to play in the tournaments that, I have to grind my way out over and over and over and over again and kind of harness the will set or wield this knife of sorts, or even get the knife to the position where it can be used. Missing the point that harnessing and getting the knife to the point where it can be used is kind of the thing that gets you to the position itself. I guess I'm making the point. It seems that whether it's the Mexico border thing, whether it's, okay, I'm delegating these responsibilities to Kamala Harris, even when she was running her campaign, the campaign was dysfunctional. I mean, the money that was being spent without being able to kind of utilize it and do the job and being a top-tier candidate, all this other stuff. It just seems like they took that into the vice president's office. And, at some point, if you're trying to be president, and like you said, president in waiting, Joe Biden said he's a transitional figure. Well, if she's a vice president, I would imagine that that's the person he's talking about transitioning to. This is just kind of basic stuff that you need to be able to manage.
Well, and it's particularly damning because you might think that she brought her campaign people with her to the Veep's office, but that's not true. They're all a bunch of former Biden aides that Biden put in for her. So in other words, there's dysfunction, two different sets of staff, dysfunction. You have to look at the leadership right there.
Well, no, I didn't mean, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it literally. I just meant that whatever that atmosphere was that she had in that campaign trail that was dysfunctional, she brought that to the VP spot. That's all I meant. I didn't mean she was taking that literally. I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is it comes from, but I'm agreeing.
It comes from her.
It's even more damning.
Yeah.
There's no way she can run away from it. It's her. And it's going to come out more and more. You could say, who cares? So she has to hire new staffers every now and then, whatever. But, I keep going back to that second debate after she sort of came out with that, I was that little girl. And then, she had to know in the second debate that she was going to be ganged up on because she was surging in the polls, that they were all going to go after her. And yet she was completely unprepared. Yeah. And that shows to me a lack of openness, and it shows a certain arrogance, and it shows disorganization.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
The arrogance. Because the arrogance gets into the point of like, all right, I should be here without doing the constituent things or being able to. I mean, this sounds like Amy Klobuchar. In interviews, 22 current and former vice presidential aides, administration officials, and associates of Harris and Biden described a tense and at times dour office atmosphere. Aides and allies said Florina, in apparent effort to protect Harris, has instead created an insular environment where ideas are ignored or met with harsh dismissals and decisions are dragged out. Often, they said, she refused to take responsibility for delicate issues and blamed staffers for the negative results that ensue.
And throwing people under the bus on a high level. That's another kind of paraphrase, almost a direct quote from this article. That doesn't sound good. Like you're saying, those aren't the qualities of a leader. Ted, we've got to close here. Thank you for the conversation. Great, wide-ranging one this morning.
Thank you so much.
And for those listening, that was Ted Rall. He's a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rall. Read his cartoons and articles at rall.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we are taking your calls. The last segment of the show today, 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. We're going to be back in a minute in our wrap segment. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
At a basic level, Kamala Harris is not working. That's what Jamarl and I were talking about over the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Last segment of the show right now. We're going into a break in our day break in about 10, 13 minutes here. Our lines are open until then. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, 202-521-1320. Tarif, calling from New Orleans. You're on the line. What's on your mind?
Taking my call. My free Julian Assange v. James or free West Parkland again. I want to talk about two comments. Julian Assange is getting more and more help from the a dozen of Australian Parliament members. They came out with a video saying that he needs to be freed. The Italian Parliament, over a dozen, maybe 20 or 30 people stood up saying, "Viva Julian Assange, holding up his pictures with him, saying "Viva Julian Assange." That's good. So he's getting more and more publicity to get this man freed. Stan Moore still have to come over and talk to the Senate and the Congress to try to get him out, and we're gonna have our back too. You know, Tucker Carlson, by you saying they have a leaker that told him about he's being spied on, it really going to hit the fan, because if that person comes out, because I'm pretty sure the NSA and the DOJ is looking for that person inside the NSA. If that person comes out with evidence showing documentation that he was being spied on and some other people, then that's going to be damaging to the Biden administration, especially because that person's going to have direct access to Tucker Carlson and other media outlets.
It depends on when it started, because it could have started under Trump too. But I hear you on that.
It's true. It could have started underneath Trump. I just watch it.
If it happened, big disclaimer here. If it's even a thing. Tarif, any more points here?
Yeah, but I'm just saying. So if it happened under Trump or under Biden, then that's going to be a strike against the NSA.
Oh yeah,
it's going to have to be changed.
But there are too many strikes on that list, you know, to sum up or whatever. But no, Tucker would make hay out of that if he got that confirmed.
I do think it's telling, however, that no one at the network has said anything else about it.
I don't know what it tells though.
I think it tells something that they don't stand by it.
I think the network is owned by Rupert Murdoch, as Michael from Sydney said the other day, and I don't trust that dude.
Fair enough. You don't have to trust that dude, but all things being equal, oftentimes they stand by stuff like this, where they would be like, our guy's on the line, we're going to back our guy. And for whatever reason, nobody has said anything. Like you said, we don't know what's indicative of.
I do not.
Let's just put a pin that
it's true.
That is true.
I guess my baseline here is I don't particularly trust Tucker Carlson, but I trust him more than every single other person at Fox News put together, every ounce of their brain matter.
My feelings of trust or not trust, it's neither, I guess. It's a nothingness of Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, you're just saying wait and see.
Yeah, it's kind of like, all right, nobody has said anything there.
Totally.
Typically, you would think that somebody would say something, but like you said, who knows? It's maybe indicative of nothing.
What's also
I think it's indicative of something.
What's also telling, I went on Twitter, as people sometimes do. It's always a mistake. Just kidding. But I went on Twitter, and I forget who was commentating on this, but exactly, they're kind of mocking Tucker Carlson for making these claims. And nobody else at Fox standing up for him.
They mocked Trump.
And tellingly,
they were wrong.
The first response that I saw was somebody being like, well, if the NSA wasn't spying on Tucker Carlson, they should be, because he's a big threat to American democracy. He's a big white supremacist threat. That was the first response, Jamarl. That's the first response.
That's so terrifying.
That's the thing, and I can see them thinking to themselves.
I mean, honestly, like,
I can see there being an element. I'm sorry, I can see there being an element in the NSA that is like, Tucker Carlson is a threat to domestic security, therefore, et cetera, et cetera.
But see, that line of thinking, it's almost like saying, all right, we have America. However, we needed to get Cuba because we need a buffer zone between these two things.
Yeah.
And then you get Cuba, so okay, we need a buffer zone between Cuba and something else. Like it's like you're inching your way to something. If Tucker Carlson is fair game, then everybody is fair game.
Yes, yeah.
It's that. And honestly, if this is true, then oh my God, it should be screamed to the rooftops.
That's the thing.
That's a big deal.
That is the thing.
Like meaning it's not that I think that it's not that I don't have this kind of reaction to like, oh my God, this is a big deal. It's that I don't trust Tucker Carlson. And I think he's a bloviating, just like no different than Rachel Maddow in the way that they bloviate. They may bloviate in different ways. They may use or cut information different ways, but ultimately they're bloviators for their cause.
And Rachel Maddow in the same class as Alex Jones now, officially, in terms of providing entertainment instead of just news. You know what I mean with that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The entertainment value of the stuff as opposed to this kind of news, etc.
People come to her for opinions, not necessarily facts.
Exactly. But you get my point. It's like I don't have to do anything for Tucker. It's either true or not. And at this point, it's a not to me.
Yeah.
Until I find something else to say that is true, only because I don't have, it's like you err towards the side, right?
Two random points on Tucker Carlson. One, he is a very skilled soliloquist. He does good monologues or whatever.
Yes,
his monologues in his show, well written, well performed, that whole thing. He's good at that. And two, have you ever noticed how when he's interviewing guests, his face has this almost constant impression. I'm not going to succeed, but it's like
smug.
It's kind of
very smug.
But he's also like disbelieving.
Yeah,
and his mouth is slightly open.
Yeah, it's very aggravating to watch. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying, right? It's like that kind of.
I was going to say Sam Cedar to get across the thing, but it's the same thing. It's that it's an air of superiority about the way that it's being interviewed. And
it's also like incredulity and skepticism. There's something
really
like that.
Aggravating point to deal with. Like I'm looking at it, it would anger you, or at least for me, it would aggravate me just being there. It's like, why is this guy looking at me like this? Like he just utterly disbelieves everything that's saying.
But
it's
he's
so
also
aggravating.
But it's also he's the popular dude on the right to make fun of because in some sense he gets the most flack because he's over the target on a lot of this stuff. With Syria, we talked about this.
So he's over the top for a point. That's his
What'd you say?
thing. He's over the top for a point.
Yes, he's over the top for a point. And he's a smart dude. No reason to, I would say, no reason to ignore that. He knows what gets viewers. He knows what gets attention. He's pretty good at covering stories. He understands the narrative, how stories work in terms of time and events and new information coming out and being on top of that stuff. I'm not saying he's spectacular that way. Pretty much anybody who's been in the news for a long time develops that sense for like tracking a story and managing it, managing your coverage of it. But he's smart in that way. Obviously. Anyway, Glenn Greenwald come out backing him in a big way. Come out making fun of CNN because Brian Stelter was mocking Tucker Carlson for
even bringing it up.
For bringing it up.
I mean,
and
this
saying
is like
the
the
NSA
Trump
was
stuff.
wrong.
Trump's
all this
like,
stuff.
I'm being spied on, no wiretap, and they're like, oh, he's lying. You find out he's not lying.
He's not lying.
He's not lying.
And Brian Stelter criticizing Tucker Carlson for doing this without running it past Fox's editorial board or getting full confirmation or whatever. Look at it. This is what Glenn Greenwald did. Like tweet by tweet, he's like just posting images of old articles and retractions and things where time and again, whether it's like
they got it wrong.
The Cuomo's on CNN, Mario Cuomo, or not Mario Cuomo, Chris Cuomo talking with Andrew, that whole thing, time and again, inappropriate, incorrect, whatever, them making these mistakes. And Glenn Greenwald, he's right about that. Tucker Carlson, as far as I can tell, he makes mistakes too. News media broadly, not a good space. People don't like journalists for very good reasons.
This is either true or false. And it's either, it's like the goal of it is, okay, what's true?
Yeah.
CNN coming out saying it's entirely false. How would the CNN know? CNN doesn't meaning when the Hunter Biden story came out, for example, and it was like, oh, that's entirely wrong. It's entirely wrong. You can't even discuss or bring this up. And then you find out all of you were wrong. And then it's like, well, were you guys wrong for a political reason? And it becomes that stuff. They don't want to talk about that stuff. They want to move on from their mistakes. Okay, fair enough. You guys are right. It's a true story. It's like, yeah, but can we dwell on the point of how wrong you all were and how you even blocked the ability for people to discuss or for that even to be a topic for X amount of time within the context of your wrongness? It's like, that's a big deal. But they will move on and they will say, oh, this is a non-story. It's like, dude, you guys were wrong like a few months ago. What are you talking about?
That disinformation is like the second most dangerous thing on this planet behind nuclear weapons. If there's like a funeral pyre on which all of humanity, if our civilization, whatever, is going to burn, it's going to be, the kindling for that fire is going to be the New York Times, the Washington Post. It's true. I'm not kidding. They lie about this stuff constantly.
We're talking about Donald Rumsfeld.
We're talking about Donald Rumsfeld
the Iraq War.
Yeah.
New York Times.
Yes.
New York Times. So let's be clear. What, Judith Miller? Pages of the New York Times.
Yes.
It will Washington Post, one of those articles. But yeah, that's your point.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we got a couple minutes left. We're going to be closing it out, taking your calls 202-521-1320. Before I forget, I believe that we are taking Monday off because it's the 4th of July.
Yes, we are.
So we're not going to be on the air on Monday. We are going to be back on Tuesday. We are going to be on the air tomorrow because it's Friday. I'm just giving you slightly early warning, but that's what it is. Anyway, 202-521-1320 is the phone number. We got a couple minutes left here, Jamarl. Any last topics we want to sop back up?
I'm not sure. I mean, I thought today's show went quite well. I enjoyed the conversations with everyone. Scott is always fascinating because of his knowledge and his experience with that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, as he says, like, I bumped into Donald Rumsfeld twice, and here's my result. And it's like, wow. Because it's one thing for me to say, I think he's a horrible person, et cetera. That's me at a distance saying, okay, this is what he did, et cetera. It's another thing for Scott to be like, I bumped into the guy, I met the guy, I talked to the guy used me.
This is how he screwed me over. Exactly. It's personal.
It's so personal.
I had no idea he had that specific interaction.
That is so wild.
You got the sense he was an active figure. He was Scott, I mean, prominent figure back in the day when this stuff was going on.
Yeah.
While Rumsfeld was in there.
That is a phenomenal interview. Yeah.
It was great. It was good. He was very good.
Yeah, he said, the guy screwed me over. That's how I know Donald Rumsfeld.
He's a liar. Exactly.
Oh man, that is phenomenal.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I mean, I had no idea that was his direct experience. So that was great to have that conversation with him. Having a conversation with Ted again, having this thing in New York is like, yeah, man. And I'm curious about how is New York going to deal with that information? Like, meaning, what is the media space going to be like?
You're talking about the Trump organization stuff?
The Trump organization and stuff. I mean, from my understanding, he's a pariah in New York at this point, right? I mean, so
yeah, unless you're like a closeted conservative or whatever. For the vast majority of folks,
yeah, and Democrats are taking a machinery in New York basically full time. Who knows what Cuomo is going to take place? Meaning that right-wing Democrat faction may fall in New York with Cuomo and everything else, especially in the next election. Meaning Trump, especially from the standpoint of New York, there may be a pivot point in going after him.
What do you mean?
Like the mechanics of the state at this point are going to turn into this thing of, let's say, wokeism is not the right word for it. Cuomo, when he was in power, he hated Donald Trump's guts and used that as a platform to attack Trump because Trump was attacking him.
Well, because everybody was comparing the two.
Exactly.
So he needed to win.
Right. But at this point, the people who were taking power in Trump, whether Letitia James, or this kind of
Cyrus Arvance Jr.
Yeah.
Whether it's the attorney general or the district attorney.
Yeah, they hate his guts.
They do. Well, but and they see him as a scalp. And
yes.
if they're going to beat out Cuomo and stand a chance at becoming the governor of New York, which last I checked, at the very least, Letitia James
she could be. Yeah, why wouldn't she? I mean, Cyrus, at this point, she has political positioning for it.
Yeah.
She has the name recognition for it.
They're building it up for that. But I don't think that would happen under Andrew Cuomo because they both tried to, James specifically, went after Cuomo.
Yeah.
She's standing up to him in some sense and trying to take him out, although that story has died out slightly. I haven't heard as much about Cuomo recently. When we talk to Michael Goodwin, who we aim to talk to soon from the New York Post, we should come back to the Cuomo story.
Absolutely.
Be like, what are the updates on that? What's new? Because active investigations that are ongoing. And curious that we don't hear too much coming out from those leaks or whistleblowing from those. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, closing today's show out. See you again tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern. Have a great day, folks. Signing off. See you on the other side.